Chapter 1413. A country may be big but a warmonger is bound to die. At this time, although the Yang faction was incomparably powerful, the pace of expansion was a little too fast. Just the external forces alone were divided into three. Along the way there were battles between the Ili region and several other countries. Hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen and infantrymen were mobilized there. Just the amount of food needed to feed the men and horses every day was not a small number, not to mention the fact that there were always deaths in war. Those who were injured needed money to be treated, those who died needed money to be buried, and those who died needed to be compensated. The second front was the sea. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and thousands of cannons. Every time they fought, the amount of ammunition used was not small. Along the way were 100,000 cavalrymen, 1,000,000 peasants, and a steady stream of people from all over the world who were marching towards the Golden Horde from Siberia. The road was rugged, the distance was long, and the consumption was astronomical. Over time it would form a considerable pressure on the finances. Fortunately, the Yang faction had a vast territory and most of the provinces were already on the basis of self-sufficiency. They could effectively support the Yang faction headquarters. If it were any other dynasty, they probably wouldn't have been able to hold on. Even so, in the long run it would be a burden on the finances. Yang Qindong knew this. When he led the troops into the Liaodong region, he made the decision to fight as quickly as possible. While there were disadvantages, there were also advantages. For example, when the navy attacked the cities, they seized a large amount of wealth and transported it back to Xianxia city. There were not only gold and silver but also a large number of minerals that Xianxia needed. This income had exceeded the cost of the navy. This was a good start, and it also made many people in Xianxia realize how useful the sea could be. It was because of this that no one openly questioned Yang Qindong's expansion. Even if someone said something, he might not care and it would not affect the morale of the army. But it was good that nothing happened. There was also the silver mining in Shaowei province that was starting to show results. As more and more silver mines were discovered, the mining team mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. The amount of silver mined every day was not a small number. For this reason, Xianxia's treasury was greatly supported, and the pressure of needing money was not as great. As Yang Qindong thought about this, a smile appeared on his face. He had just received a piece of news that made him happy through the telegram. Feng Ke's research team in Crimson City, after he went back to teach them last time, had finally rushed out the first true steam engine. This was all thanks to the engine prototype that Yang Qindong had proposed, and after pushing it back, the experiment was finally successful. Historically, in 1679 AD, the French physicist Denis Barbon built the first working model of a steam engine after watching steam escape from his pressure cooker. His contemporary Samuel Morand also proposed the idea of a steam engine. Now that they had appeared more than 200 years earlier, Yang Qindong did not dare to imagine how great of an advantage they would have. Although the vacuum steam engine was now used to pump water into the mine, the principle was that after steam was introduced into the cylinder, the valve was closed and then cold water was poured into the cylinder. When the steam condensed, it created a vacuum. The air pressure on the other side of the piston pushed the piston. In the mine, a rod that went deep into the shaft was connected to drive a pump. The movement of the steam engine's piston was transmitted through the rod to the pump's piston to pump water out of the well. But no matter what, there was still a steam engine. If there was one, there would be two. He saw hope. To the people of the future, this thing was not complicated. To put it bluntly, a steam engine needed a boiler that boiled water to produce high-pressure steam. This boiler could use wood, coal, oil, natural gas, or even combustible garbage as a heat source. The steam expanded to push the piston to work. Once the steam engine technology matured, it was widely used in power stations, factories, locomotives, ships, and other fields. It was especially used on warships as the only prime mover at that time. After the telegram was sent, Yang Qindong was excited and happy for a while. He knew that with the steam engine, whether it was mining or other fields, the efficiency would increase a lot. This was the beginning of real industrial development. He personally wrote a telegram praising the research team led by Feng Ke. He also gave a large reward and a second-class medal to show their merit. Xianxia had a total of 7 medals representing 7 different merits. From low to high they were iron, bronze, silver, gold medals, third class, second class, and the highest level first class medal. These medals were not only a symbol of status and honor, but they could also be used to exchange for large amounts of money and land with the Yang faction. In times of crisis, they could even save one's life and had some of the effects of the death exemption medal. This was a good thing that everyone in the Yang faction wanted, especially a second-class medal. As a second-class medal, it could probably be used to offset any mistakes other than those that committed a rebellion. This was the first time such a medal was issued, and Feng Ku was the first recipient. It was clear that Yang Qindong valued him highly. It was also clear that technology was the #1 development force. Who knew how many people were envious and jealous of him? At the same time, Yang Qindong also asked the other party to build more steam engines and continue to improve them, so that they could be a great help to Xia's development. In a good mood, Yang Qindong, who was riding on the white dragon, had a smile on his face. It wasn't until another telegram was sent in front of him that his good mood was broken. The telegram was sent by the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Tian Hu. It said that the cavalry scouts he sent out met the deputy division commander of the 3rd Army, Lu Dai, at the border between the Ural region and the Northwest region. He learned from Lu Dai that the 3rd Army was besieged in Tove City and was waiting for reinforcements. Lu Dai didn't disappoint Wuxia. He led less than 80 cavalry out of the encirclement and ran for 3 days tirelessly. Along the way, many people fell behind and many died of exhaustion on the way to deliver the message. Finally, when Lu Dai was tired and hungry, he finally met the scouts of the world's first cavalry army and was able to send the message. This telegram didn't only say that Wuxia was besieged, it also said that the Golden Horde and the Ross Duchy were very hostile towards the 5-star army. Yang Qindong didn't expect that because of his sudden appearance, the two feuds would temporarily join forces. This wasn't a good thing for Yang Qindong, who was an outsider, and he couldn't allow this to happen. If they join forces, then cut them off. Send a telegram to Commander Tian Hu to rush to Tove City at all costs to save Wuxia and the other soldiers. At the same time, order my army to speed up. We will quickly give the Golden Horde a fierce blow. Tell them that this king is here. Yang Qindong said with an unfriendly expression. He always believed that if you offend me, I will pay you back. Many times he even took the initiative to look for trouble. Now how could he back down just because these two forces joined forces? Moreover, this so-called alliance in Yang Qindong's eyes was more of a sign. He didn't believe that they would really care about each other's survival. They probably wanted each other to die early. This was his chance to destroy them one by one. After the telegram was sent, Tian Hu saw the contents and his expression brightened. The world's first cavalry army hadn't fought a hard battle since the expansion of the Free Division. Now was the time to challenge themselves. As the commander, Tian Hu had always wanted to prove that Yang Qindong's choice was right. This expansion of the army not only greatly increased the number of soldiers, but also the strength of the army. Xianxia's expenditure on the world's first cavalry army was worth it. Men, call 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo and 4th Division Commander Su De. Tian Hu's voice was loud as he looked to the west. At this moment his heart was filled with fighting spirit. Tove City. 7 days had passed. In these 7 days Ivan led the White Russian army to attack dozens of times. With the help of the musketeers, the soldiers climbed up the city walls many times, but were chased down by Wuxia's soldiers. In these 7 days, both the attackers and the defenders had paid a heavy price. Tove City was also riddled with holes and looked like a fragile egg. Especially with the White Russian army's cannons in place, the attack would probably start tomorrow. In history, the reason why Ivan was able to succeed his father and lead the Russians to defeat the Golden Horde and achieve independence was because of the importance of their firearms. Otherwise, in terms of cold weapons, who would be a match for the Mongolian cavalry? At this time, the Rossi Duchy had bought many firearms from the West and had built some factories to develop firearms. In history they were a military power, but now they were just in the embryonic stage. Even so, under the constant pressure of the Golden Horde, the Rossi Duchy's progress was quite fast. Although their foundation was weaker in terms of combat strength, they were much stronger than the Great Ming Dynasty. This was what it meant: when there was pressure, there was motivation. Relying on the flintlock in his hand, Ivan didn't suffer much during the siege, and it was only a 1 versus 2 battle. As the cannons were sent to the front line, one could imagine that the initiative was completely in his hands. As expected of a general, you actually forced me to this point. General Wu, tomorrow I will not hold back. Ivan stared fiercely at Toph City, which was 2 miles away, with his large, spirited eyes. After that he turned around and left. He admired Wuxia and gave him absolute respect, which was to attack with all his might. Even so, he still let Wuxia defend the city for 7 days. Ivan could not help but sigh at Wuxia's strength. However, he knew that with the appearance of firearms, individual bravery was no longer important. Tomorrow he would definitely break into the city. At that time he would give Wuxia a chance to return to his side. Otherwise he would have to kill him. Chapter 14:14. As the future Ivan the Great, he had an extremely firm belief. In his eyes there were only 2 kinds of people. One was to be used by him and the other was to be killed by him. It was because of this potential that he was able to create such glory and become the first person to achieve complete independence in the Russian Empire. On the city gate tower of Toph City, Wuxia heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the Russian army retreating again before dusk. However, his face did not look relaxed. The Third Army was able to hold on until now only because they were defending the city and Yangchendong was coming. These gave them the belief to hold on. However, only Wuxia knew that the Third Army was already at the end of its rope. The rations in the city were running out, and the soldiers were exhausted after 7 days of continuous fighting. More importantly, they had long lost contact with the outside world. No one knew if Lu Dai had passed the news of them being surrounded to the main army, or even if he had found the main army, no one knew. It could be said that they were holding on because they did not know what was going to happen. Once the city gates were breached, they would be able to breathe a sigh of relief. It would probably be the time for the army to be defeated. Wuxia raised his head and looked to the east. There was a glimmer of hope and determination in his eyes. He had already made a decision. If the reinforcements could not arrive in time, he would shed his blood in Toph City to repay Yangchendong's kindness. This might be the last thing he could do. Commander, the scouts have discovered that the Russian army's artillery has entered the camp. The battle tomorrow will be much more dangerous. The Nuzan Cavalry Division requests to join the battle. Just as Zi Wuxia was lost in his thoughts, Commander Yella walked to his side and gave him a standard military salute before speaking in a decisive voice. The Nuzan Cavalry Division was a group of veterans who had followed Wuxia all the way from the first city. At that time it was only a cavalry division. Later, as the army continued to expand, it was upgraded. In the past 9 years, there were not many veterans left in the division. Most of them had died in the war, but their combat power had never decreased. Soldiers who grew up in the flames of war had always been brave and fearless. It was because of the Nuzan Cavalry Division's combat power that Wuxia did not send them up the city gate tower, no matter how difficult it was. Since they were the most elite cavalrymen, of course, they would only be able to display their advantage if they were mounted on war horses. Wuxia's lips moved, but in the end he nodded and agreed. He knew that this was the last moment. Just like how Yifan understood him, he also understood his opponent. This was a ruthless person who would never give any opponent a chance to breathe. All right, it's approved. Yes, General. Yella saluted again, then turned around and left. Wuxia's eyes moistened as he watched the Nuzan's resolute footsteps gradually disappear into the distance. He knew very well that the Nuzan Cavalry Division only had a little more than 8,000 people, and the White Russians still had 20,000 cavalry that had not moved. The White Russians were tall and strong and they had immense strength. It was not guaranteed that they would win in a one-on-one battle. The ratio was close to 3-1, and the outcome of this battle was precarious. However, he had no other choice. If he didn't let the Nuzan Cavalry Division charge out now, once the city was breached, the advantage of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. That would be a huge loss. Looking at Lu Dai's departing figure, Wuxia knew that he might not return this time. His mood instantly became much more downcast. That night, both the Third Corps and the White Russians had a good night's sleep. They knew that the final battle would be tomorrow, and they had to use this opportunity to recuperate and preserve their strength for tomorrow's battle. However, on a mountain path a few hundred li away, a group of 20,000 cavalrymen was galloping quickly with 3 horses each. Under the limited moonlight, the cavalrymen were racing against time. They came like the wind and left like lightning, heading straight for Toph City. The sky was finally bright and the White Russians outside the city started cooking. Steam rose from the camp and smoke rose in spirals. In Toph City, Wuxia had already changed into a clean set of armor and walked out of the barracks. Last night he gave the order to take out all the food in the city for the army's breakfast. For this reason, some of the White Russians in the city had their food stored and their homes searched, causing many people to cry. Wuxia couldn't care less about this. If these were Han people, he would rather starve to death than steal food from them. However, they were a foreign race. The sixth young master had said that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Since that was the case, so what if they stole food? What could they do to him? If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the White Russians led by Ivan outside the city. Both sides seemed to have foreseen something and neither side was in a hurry. The breakfast lasted for 2 hours. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides finally got into position, ready to fight to the death. Cannons were pushed to the front of the White Russians. The black cannons were aimed at the walls of Tove City, ready to fire at any moment. "General, why don't we capture some of the civilians and bring them up to the city walls? That way, the White Russians will have some reservations," the 1st Division's commander Min Fu suggested to Wuxia. "No need." Wuxia shook his head without hesitation. He had already robbed the White Russians of their food and he had already let them down. How could he joke around with their lives? Furthermore, based on his understanding of Ivan, even if he captured the White Russians and brought them up to the city walls, he would not stop Ivan from ordering the cannons to fire. It was still the same words. The other party was a ruthless person, a person who would not easily give up in order to achieve his goal. Since that was the case, why bother? Not only would it disgust Ivan, but it would also disgust him. After rejecting Min Fu's suggestion, Wuxia looked to his side. When he did not see Commander Yella, he knew that Yella was ready. With a sigh, he raised his head again and his eyes were filled with determination. "Everyone listen to my orders. When the cannon booms, everyone find cover and hide. After the order is given, all soldiers will fire their bows and arrows. Let's give the enemy a fierce wave of attacks first." Wuxia was very familiar with cannons. After all, they were the Cold Vanguard Division's foundation and they were the first to use guns and cannons. However, in the past few years they had not received any support and the Type 95 had run out of ammunition. Now he had found a safe place to hide them. Since he had played with guns and cannons before, he knew the power of these things, so he had already prepared a countermeasure. After the soldiers heard the order, they responded in unison. Under the leadership of the company commander, platoon leader and squad leader, they each found a safe place to hide and took out all their bows and arrows, preparing for the final battle. Under the city gate tower, 20 cannons were slowly pushed forward. They stopped 300 meters away from Tove City as if there was no one around. Some of the cannons of the White Russians were made by themselves, and some were bought from Western merchants. Some of the better cannons had a range of 3 to 4 kilometers, which was much better than the ones made by Biming. However, Ivan still gave the order to push the cannons to a distance of 300 meters. He did not want to create enough psychological pressure for the 5-star army to defend the city. After the 20 cannons were placed, Ivan rode on his horse and shouted from the middle of the army, giving the order to fire. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. The cannons shot into the sky and quickly landed on the city walls of Tove City. Immediately, a series of earth-shaking sounds could be heard. Then rocks flew everywhere from the explosion. Pieces of the city walls also began to peel off, falling everywhere. Smoke and dust filled the sky and the ground shook. At this moment, the 3rd Star Army could only hide and take the hits. They did not have the strength to fight back at all. The commander of the Wuxia army hid in a safe bunker. His face was dark the whole time. He thought to himself hopefully, "Just you wait. When the 6th young master comes, he will show you what a real cannon is. When that time comes, I hope you can still be so arrogant." It was as if he was chanting scriptures in his heart. After about half an hour, the sound of the cannons finally stopped. Wuxia opened his eyes and shouted, "The enemy is about to attack the city. Everyone prepare your bows and arrows." Under the city walls, after the sound of the cannons, the White Russians began to attack. In the previous cannon fire, not only did more than half of the city walls outside Tove City fall off, a part of the city walls also collapsed. This was a city wall made of mountain rocks. There was no cement to adhere to it, so it was indeed much worse in terms of sturdiness. There was a serious gap in the city walls, and the White Russians moved forward along the collapsed corner. The White Russians at the front were soldiers with shields in their hands. They were preparing to defend themselves against an attack from arrows. Fire! As Commander Wu Xing shouted from the top of the city gate tower, tens of thousands of arrows were released. Countless arrows appeared from the sky and fell to the ground. The shields were effective, and in a short period of time, countless shields were pierced by arrows. One White Russian soldier after another fell to the ground due to the lack of protection, or some of the people who had been hit by arrows were howling on the ground. However, this was not enough to stop the battle. Even more White Russian soldiers raised their muskets and swords and charged forward. War was cruel, and this was especially true. When a large number of White Russian soldiers took advantage of the opening and rushed up the tower, the most brutal close combat began. One side wanted to rush up the city walls and occupy this place. The other side wanted to defend this place and not allow anyone to rush up. When their goals were in conflict, the only thing that mattered was who had the bigger fist and who had the final say. On top of the city walls, after a large number of White Russian soldiers swarmed in, many soldiers from the 5-star army also charged out. They held swords, sabers, and spears in their hands as they charged at the White Russian soldiers who were much taller than them. Ever since he saw the new army use this formation to defeat the Golden Horde cavalry with the same number of people, he learned this method. Now that he was using it, he was very satisfied with the results. In a short period of time, both the city walls and the city walls had entered a white-hot tragic battle. Almost every second someone died. At this moment, human lives seemed so ordinary and worthless. The flames of the battle continued because both sides and the cannons were no longer useful. Ivan also ordered the cannoneers to pick up swords and sabers and use them as echelons of the army. He needed to send these soldiers up when the Third Army could no longer hold on. At that time they would be the straw that broke the camel's back, the key to victory. 2 hours passed and the battlefield was shrouded in the stench of blood, making people want to vomit. However, no one seemed to notice. The dead were already dead while the living were still fighting, trying to seize a chance to live from the hands of the Grim Reaper. It's about time. After the battle had lasted for nearly 4 hours, Ivan said with emotion. Then the flag was raised high again. The moment it was waved down, the 20,000 White Russian soldiers all pressed forward. The addition of these new forces would be an important factor in tipping the scales of victory. On the city gate tower, Wu Xing raised his saber and swung it down. Another White Russian soldier was killed at his feet. Covered in blood, his killing intent caused the White Russian soldiers on the other side to involuntarily retreat. Using this time, he looked at the situation on the battlefield and his brows furrowed. At this point, all of the new army soldiers had joined the battle. Even the logistic soldiers and medics were no exception. However, they were only temporarily undefeated. And now, Ivan had sent another 20,000 White Russian soldiers. With this force, he could foresee that the new army's defeat was inevitable. Sixth young master, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again in the future. I only hope that you can take revenge for this general. Before I die, I will definitely kill a few more White Russian soldiers to prove that the dignity of the 5-star army is inviolable. Wu Xing roared, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." This shout quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Immediately, the other division commanders and officers also shouted, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." In that instant, the morale of the 5-star army soldiers who had been suppressed began to rise, forcing the White Russian soldiers who had a certain advantage to retreat. However, as more White Russian reinforcements arrived, this momentum was finally suppressed and pushed back. Not only that, but with the addition of the 20,000 White Russian soldiers, the 5-star army was suppressed to the point where they could not raise their heads. After more than 4 hours of bitter fighting, many of the warriors found it difficult to even lift their swords, let alone injure or kill their enemies. Does the heavens want my Third Army to die? Wu Xing, who also felt his arms go numb, couldn't help but roar after cutting down another White Russian soldier. Following his shout, a boundless green light suddenly appeared on the east side of Toph City. Then it quickly approached the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. What is that? Wu Xing wasn't the only one who saw this scene. Many soldiers and White Russian soldiers also saw it, but because they were too far away, many people didn't know what it was. Ivan also saw this scene, but his face was filled with confusion. He looked at General Vanya and asked, "What's that? A green light that can move, what is it?" "I don't know," General Vanya shook his head with a confused expression. On the city wall, Wuxia also didn't understand what was going on. However, 2nd Division Commander Chun Yong killed 2 White Russian soldiers and came to his side. General, do you think that is our uniform? Uniform? Wuxia's eyes widened when he heard this. He used to have a green uniform with the rank of senior colonel, and he looked very handsome in it. However, that was a few years ago. Ever since he entered the depths of this area, his uniform had been damaged. Without new uniforms, it became a collection and was stored away. After that, he didn't know where it ended up, and it became a memory in the depths of his heart. Now that Chun Yong reminded him, a memory that he hadn't seen for a long time instantly popped up in his mind. When he saw the green light getting closer and closer, Wuxia shouted excitedly, "Yes, that must be the color of our uniform. That is our reinforcements, our reinforcements are here." As he shouted, Wuxia didn't forget to wave his hands and shout. His appearance quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. The originally low morale and weak army seemed to have been rejuvenated after hearing the commander's words. Suddenly they were filled with energy. When they raised their swords, they found that they were no longer as weak as before. The reinforcements were here, which meant that there was hope. There was also meaning in persevering. At this moment, everyone's potential was stimulated, and they were filled with energy again like hungry men who had seen delicious food. The soldiers of the 3rd Star were like middle-aged old men who had been rejuvenated. They actually managed to push the White Russians back dozens of meters in a very short period of time, and had a 50-50 standoff on the city gate tower. On the open ground outside the city, Yellow was fighting a bloody battle with the White Russians with bloodshot eyes. In 4 hours, more than half of his cavalry division had been killed or injured. If it weren't for the strict military discipline, and if it weren't for the fact that he was still persevering on the battlefield, the army would have been defeated a long time ago. When he shouted to fight for the dignity of the 5-star army on the city gate tower, Yella had already decided to fight to the death. Since he thought that killing 1 was enough for him and killing 2 was enough for him, he was ready to die. It was also at this moment that he saw the green tide and he saw the appearance of hope. "Comrades, our reinforcements are here. Our reinforcements are here. Hold on a little longer and victory will be right in front of us." The appearance of hope made Yella seem like a different person. His body seemed to be a lot more nimble while riding on his warhorse. Whether it was on the city gate or below, the 3rd Star army began to counterattack and brought pressure to the White Russians. Ivan, who was standing in the middle of the army, felt all of this. He also saw the approaching green tide and knew that Wuxia's reinforcements must have arrived. Where did their reinforcements come from? And they're all cavalry? Could it be a trap set by the Golden Horde? General Vanya asked with a puzzled expression. No, the cavalry of the Golden Horde doesn't have such a uniform. It should be the 5-star army. Ivan's expression was a little ugly. He didn't expect that Wuxia's reinforcements would appear so close to victory. He saw that there were still 5,000 soldiers behind him. 1,000 of them were on horseback and 4,000 paces. This was the last of his strength. He clenched his teeth and revealed a determined gaze as he said, "Their reinforcements are not that many, less than 20,000. We have cannons in our hands and can completely give them a head-on blow. This way victory and defeat will not be decided yet." Chapter 14-16. Ivan didn't want to give up just like that. In his eyes, Wuxia was an outstanding general. It was a blessing to have such a person as a friend. If he was an enemy, then he had to be eliminated. Otherwise, it would always be a big problem. The war had already reached this point. If he gave up now, he really didn't know when he would be able to surround the other party again. He might as well go all out and put all his forces into it. It was just the right time to test the combat power of the so-called 5-star army. He put all the 2,000 reserve troops in place and all the cannoneers were in place. They began to adjust the direction of the cannons. They were just waiting for the green tide to enter the range to give them a good show. The green tide coming from afar was the world's first cavalry army. Led by Commander Tian Hu, they were led by 2nd Division Lu Duo and 4th Division Su Ku. In addition to the military guard regiment, there were a total of 18,000 people. 1 man and 3 horses, led by Deputy Division Commander Yi Dai, finally arrived outside Tove City at the last moment. Still far away, the chaotic scene outside the city fell into the eyes of Tian Hu and the generals. At the same time, with the help of binoculars, The 20 cannons of the White Russian army were also clearly seen. They had already learned from Yi Dai that the White Russian army was good at using firearms, and the caliber of the cannons in their hands was not small. It was precisely because of this that they gradually became evenly matched with the old power of the Golden Horde. Cannons? They can deal with the Mongolian cavalry, but they are still a little lacking if they want to deal with the world's first cavalry army. Tianhu's eyes revealed a look of contempt, but when he gave the order as he rode, he was very cautious. He said to Hu Helu, who was already the head of the guards, "Inform everyone that the other party has cannons. Don't let them hit them. Tell the soldiers to disperse and advance. Change the arrow formation to a 3-3 formation. These are solid cannons. They won't explode, so it's not a big deal. Also, inform 2nd Division Lu Duo to bring people to destroy the enemy's artillery position. Don't let them stand there and make people hate them." "Yes, Commander." After Hu Helu agreed, he quickly went to send the message. Not long after, the cavalrymen who were originally running in a group dispersed and ran forward in groups of 3. The change in the formation of the world's #1 cavalry army made it difficult for the White Russian artillerymen who were adjusting the direction of the cannons. This was the first time they had seen such a scattered formation. Without a concentrated enemy, even if the cannons fired, the casualties would be limited. Moreover, each cannon shell was expensive to make. It was not worth it to waste them like this. "Fight, don't be afraid of wasting." Ivan's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect the 5-star army to react so quickly. Especially the cavalry, they actually changed their formation while running. Not only was there no chaos, but they were also very orderly. Just based on this point, they were not any weaker than the 3rd-star army. The stronger the army, the more Ivan couldn't let them survive. No matter what, he still had the initiative on the battlefield. The 3rd-star army was about to be destroyed. As long as he blocked the reinforcements from the 5-star army after dealing with the 3rd-star army, he wouldn't let a single person from the 5-star army escape. Pass down the order. Split the cavalry into half to block the enemy's attack. Order the infantry to attack faster and finish off the 3rd-star army as soon as possible. Ivan didn't have any intention of backing down. He was even prepared to eliminate the reinforcements from the 5-star army. Although the appearance of the reinforcements was out of his expectations, there were only 10,000 of them. He didn't put them in his eyes. On the battlefield, he still had at least 50,000 soldiers. On the other hand, the new 3rd Army only had about 10,000 soldiers. Even with the addition of 20,000 reinforcements, he still had a huge advantage in terms of military strength. What was there to be afraid of? Ivan, who was determined to finish off the 3rd-star army, didn't realize the existence of danger. He also didn't know the strength of the enemy in front of him. On the contrary, if they were on the grasslands, mentioning the #1 cavalry army in the world of the 5-star army, many opponents would be afraid before they even fought. They wouldn't be able to calmly fight to the death like this. Ivan's order was passed down and the artillery was ready to fire. Some of the cavalry on the battlefield also adjusted their direction and went straight to Tianhu's army in the distance. Good. Seeing that there were enemy cavalry blocking the road ahead, Tianhu's face flashed with excitement. This time, after attacking the far east with Yang Chendong, he didn't have a chance to fight to his heart's content. The opponents he encountered were so weak that they couldn't withstand a single blow. He hoped that the White Russian army wouldn't disappoint him this time. On the battlefield, generals hoped that their opponents would be weaker so that their chances of winning would be higher. It was rare for Tianhu to think like this, but it was enough to prove his confidence in the cavalry under his command. The green tide finally entered the battlefield from the northeast under the eyes of tens of thousands of people. What greeted them was 20 iron bullets. They came from afar, leaping towards the #1 cavalry army. Faced with the roar of the cannons, even the well-trained warhorses of the White Russian army seemed a little restless. However, Tianhu's army didn't have any reaction. Their charging speed didn't decrease in the slightest. Most of the soldiers didn't even try to dodge. They just pressed their bodies against the backs of their horses to reduce the wind resistance. Under the 3-3 system, the effect of the solid cannonballs was very limited. Except for a few soldiers who were unlucky and were hit by the iron bullets, most of the cavalry charged towards the White Russian army without slowing down. The distance between the two sides was rapidly closing. 800 meters, 600 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters, 80 meters. Seeing that the battle was about to begin, many of the White Russian cavalrymen had already raised their sabers above their heads and were ready to chop down. The soldiers of the world's #1 cavalry army who were lying on their horses finally made their move. At some point, a crossbow had appeared in their hands. Then, when they were less than 40 meters away from the White Russian cavalrymen, they pulled the trigger and fired the Big Dipper crossbow. One arrow after another flew towards the target. With the continuous development of the steelmaking industry, the Crimson City arsenal had modified the Big Dipper crossbow. Not only were the springs more powerful, even the arrows had become sharper. After testing, they could break through 4 centimeters of planks within 80 meters, 6 centimeters of planks within 50 meters, and 5 centimeters of armor within 40 meters without a problem. This time Tianhu's Big Dipper crossbow had used such sharp arrows. When the arrows were fired at such a close distance and without any warning, the sound of arrows piercing flesh could be heard. Following this, the White Russian army fell from their warhorses one after another. Because the warhorses were too fast, it was impossible to see what had happened from the distance. After the two horses collided, the White Russian army fell from their warhorses and collapsed on the ground. There were more than 7,000 White Russian cavalry, but in just a single exchange, nearly half of them had fallen. The remaining 3,000 or so cavalry could only defend under the attacks of the #1 Cavalry Army's 3x3 formation. They were unable to attack at all. What happened? Ivan's eyes were wide open. Just as he was waiting for the 5-star Army's reinforcements to be blocked or even heavily injured, he saw his own cavalry falling from their horses as if they had been possessed. Like dumplings, they fell to the ground one after another. This completely unexpected outcome had caught Ivan off guard. His expression was no longer playful and confident, but rather nervous and angry. "Young master, we should leave quickly. These Han people are too powerful. They have already broken through our cavalry formation and are rushing over." Seeing that the situation was not good, Vanya hurriedly shouted. Ivan was the favorite son of the Grand Duke of Blindness and the most likely descendant to inherit his legacy. Something really happened to him here. Not only would he be punished, but even the family behind him would be punished and killed without leaving a single one alive. Vanya was extremely nervous as he felt threatened. On the contrary, Ivan wasn't afraid at all. On the contrary, he drew his saber and shouted, "Don't be afraid, the enemy's numbers are inferior to ours. We just need to charge and destroy their attacks. Victory will still belong to us in the end. Come, charge with this, general." Seeing that the situation on the battlefield wasn't good, not only did Ivan not run, he even shouted and wanted to charge forward. Vanya wasn't going to let that happen. He hurriedly gave a few bodyguards beside him a look. Then 4 cavalrymen appeared behind Ivan. One of them raised his right hand and struck the back of Ivan's head. Ivan's excited shouts immediately stopped and he fainted. "All cavalrymen retreat and protect young master. All infantry stay behind to stop the enemy." Without Ivan, Vanya became the highest-ranking general here. His words became the new order. The bravery of the 5-star Army's reinforcements shocked Vanya. At the same time, it also made him feel the existence of danger. As the representative of Pskov city in the Rossi Principality, Vanya was able to survive until now not because of his bravery, but because of his amazing foresight. He knew when to make the right decision. Reality proved that he was right. The 5-star Army's cavalrymen, who were still several miles away, arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. They rushed into the artillery formation in front of the city as if there was no resistance. After a series of slashes with their sabers, the artillery soldiers were defeated and left behind a pile of corpses. Then a portion of the cavalrymen led by a general wearing a white cloak went straight to the center of the army. However, Vanya had already escaped with the unconscious Ivan. He left behind thousands of soldiers to form a long snake formation to block the pursuit of the 5-star Army. Chapter 14-17. Vanya immediately took the young master and fled. Due to the urgency of the matter, he didn't even leave behind a proper sentence. This was the White Russian soldiers who had bitterly stayed behind. Without a commander, the other generals didn't know what to do next. It was inevitable that a trace of chaos would appear in the army. At this moment, Tianhu and the others launched a fierce attack. They used the Big Dipper crossbows to shoot at the enemies from afar, while they used the divine sabers to slash at the enemies at close range. In just half an hour, the first deserter appeared in the White Russian army, followed by a second, a third, and an increasing number. The valiant strength displayed by the world's #1 cavalry army quickly frightened the White Russian soldiers. When they discovered that their opponents were extremely strong, ferocious, and equipped with excellent equipment, they were far from being a match for them. Wuxia gave a loud shout and launched an all-out counterattack from the center of the city. The White Russian army's morale finally hit rock bottom, and they began to disobey orders and flee in a large area. The commander wasn't present and there were no unified orders. In addition, the world's #1 cavalry army was so valiant that no one could stop them wherever they went. Although they still had the advantage in terms of numbers, no one was able to form a unified resistance in a situation where the morale of the army was low. Even the White Russian cavalry that was fighting with the Nuzan cavalry left behind thousands of corpses and fled. Victory! Victory! Seeing that the Russian army had already escaped from the battlefield, and only his brothers were left outside the city walls, Wuxia suddenly shouted. Then with a plop he knelt on the ground and fainted. After fighting for such a long time, under great psychological pressure, he suddenly relaxed at this moment. Finally, his body could no longer hold it in and he fainted. 4 hours later, Ivan finally woke up in the carriage. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that Tove City was no longer there. He was sitting in a simple carriage. He hurriedly shouted, "Men, men! Young master, you're awake." The curtains of the carriage were lifted and a head popped out. Who else could it be but Vanya? When Ivan saw Vanya, his head was still throbbing with pain. He only remembered that he was commanding the army on the battlefield just a moment ago. How did he end up in a carriage? He asked in confusion, "Where are we?" "Young master, we are returning to Moscow," Vanya explained while observing Ivan's expression. "Return to the city?" Ifan felt that his head was not as painful as before, so he asked, "Why did you return to the city? Was Wuxia's third corps destroyed?" Evidently, that blow had indeed stunned Ivan, so much so that he still couldn't recall what had just happened. Vanya had no choice but to explain everything that had happened outside Tove City. When he talked about how he had no choice but to knock Ivan out, his voice became much softer. This kind of action was somewhat disrespectful to his superior. If Ivan insisted on making an issue out of this matter, he was afraid that he would suffer a lot. When he continued to talk about how the cavalry of the 5-star army defeated the White Russians very quickly, he still had a lingering fear in his heart. He clearly didn't expect the cavalry to be so powerful and capable of fighting. Ivan was completely awake now. After listening to the entire process of the battle, he wasn't too angry. After all, as the future Emperor Ivan, he still had this bit of tolerance. However, he still had a gloomy look on his face. He was worried about how the cavalry of the 5-star army was so powerful that they weren't even afraid of cannons. Although the cannons were solid shells that had a long range and weren't lethal, the cannons had a short range. However, the fact that the cavalry wasn't afraid of cannons and their horses weren't even affected by the cannons was enough to prove that this army had seen cannons before. "General Vanya, this young master won't argue with you about this matter this time. However, there definitely won't be a next time." Ivan pretended to be angry as he said this. He was also reminding the other party that he couldn't be knocked out again. "Thank you for your understanding, young master. This one won't dare to do it again." Vanya let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this one was finally over. "All right. Now immediately send out scouts to keep an eye on the 5-star army. We need to know their every move and their whereabouts." Ivan nodded and then made arrangements. He had already thought it through. No matter how powerful the enemy was, this was still the territory of the Ross Duchy. He would never allow other forces to run rampant and do whatever they wanted here. He wanted to go back and see his father-in-law. He wanted to ask for reinforcements and completely defeat and annihilate the 5-star army. Bulgar City, the northernmost city of the Golden Horde. As usual, the city gates opened in the early morning, and the number of people coming and going gradually increased. It was as lively as some of the cities of the Xianxia. The only difference was that the people coming and going here often led horses or other livestock. In this economically backward nation, bartering was still very popular among the people. On the contrary, the use of silver was sometimes limited. Behind a mound outside the city, Beta Persei put down a pair of binoculars in his hand, then turned sideways and whispered to Yang Chendong, "Young master, everything in the city is normal. Our people have already sneaked in. It seems that the other party didn't take any precautions. Lying on his back next to Beta Persei was Yang Chendong. At this time he was holding an unknown grass stick in his mouth and looking at the blue sky above his head. Today's weather was good. The sky was blue and there were a few cotton candy-like white clouds floating in the sky. It gave off a poetic and picturesque feeling. Tian Hu's telegram had arrived yesterday. He had already joined forces with Commander Wu Sheng. Considering that the army had suffered heavy losses and had more wounded, they were heading to a Russian city called Oxino. They wanted to take the city and use it as a base for the army to rest and recuperate. In the telegram, Tian Hu explained that the White Russians had cannons and muskets. He also said that although the enemy's cannons were solid shells, they could shoot up to 3 miles away. In terms of range, they were already the strongest enemy the 5-Star Corps had ever come into contact with. He asked if they could send a cold front unit to help them suppress the enemy's firepower on the battlefield in order to suppress them in the future. Yang Chendong had already mentally prepared himself for the fact that the White Russian army had firearms, and they were relatively powerful. How could they be easy to deal with if they could stand up to the Golden Horde when it was at its peak? How to make up for this gap was far from a problem that could be solved with the help of Wu Sheng's Third Army. Although Yang Chendong was mentally prepared, the fact that the enemy's cannons could hit more than 3 miles away still greatly exceeded his expectations. At this moment he could see the difference between the great Ming dynasty and the other countries. To think that they were still living in their own beautiful dreams and really thought that they were a great and powerful country. Look, the enemy's cannons can hit several times farther than yours. If they really fought, would you still be a match for them? In history, the Rossi kingdom had been suppressed by the Mongols too much and needed time to recuperate. Furthermore, their territory was large enough and their population was not large, so they did not have such great ambitions. Otherwise, they would have been able to push their way over from land and end the rule of the great Ming dynasty without even needing to do anything. As he sighed in his heart, Yang Chendong felt even more pressure. Outside of the great Ming dynasty, the Western countries were undergoing all kinds of reforms and rising. If he did not take advantage of this period of time to destroy them before they became fully powerful, it would be even more difficult to deal with them in the future. He was pressed for time. Yang Chendong would naturally fulfill the request in Tian Hu's telegram. He had already sent a telegram to the army headquarters in Xianxia City when he left the Far East region and asked them to send an elite Cold Vanguard division to help him. Due to the importance of the Golden Horde and the Russian Empire, they had sent the elite 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard Division, Xiaofeng. Through the telegram he knew that they had already entered the Aral region and were not far behind him. He sent out a telegram and asked Division Commander Xiaofeng to send a regiment to meet up with Commander Tian Hu. The reason Yang Chendong only sent one regiment was because he had his own plans. Faced with 2 enemies that could be described as huge, he would definitely not attack both sides with only 100,000 soldiers. He wanted to fight them one by one. The conclusion he came to was to attack the Golden Horde first, while the Russian Empire would focus on defense. If it was only to defend the city, a Cold Vanguard division with their cannons and muskets should be enough to stabilize the situation. At the same time he had to speed up his attack on the Golden Horde. His first target was the city of Bulgar. A while ago the Golden Horde had sent troops to New Xia City from here, destroying Wu Sheng's years of hard work. He would avenge this grudge on behalf of his subordinates. Considering the lack of information at that time, the appearance of the 5-Star Army should not have attracted much attention in the Golden Horde's territory. What he needed to do now was to take over as many cities as possible before the news was made public. He needed to create a place to store all kinds of supplies and lay down a sufficient foundation for his attack on the Golden Horde. Now that he had a military objective, the next step was to implement it. After discussing with Shibi and the others, they suggested that they should infiltrate Pyoga before the battle. After all, most of the people in the city were Mongols. There were also a small number of White Russians. In the new Second Army there were quite a number of such soldiers. Infiltrating the city would not be a problem. This would allow them to coordinate with the enemy from the inside and outside. Chapter 14-18. One of the reasons for making such a military decision was that Yang Chendong wanted a complete Bulgar city, not a ruined city. Not only that, he also wanted the Mongolian soldiers in the city. Considering the long journey, if the country sent troops here for everything, the losses would be too great. If he could get a Mongolian army here for his own use, the problem of insufficient military strength could be easily solved. While he was thinking about this, Beta Persei looked at Yang Chendong with a look of seeking his opinion, as if to say, "Young master, when are we going to make a move? Say something. Why are you looking at me? Just follow the plan." Yang Chendong rolled his eyes at Beta Persei and turned his head to the side. He knew that the other party was asking for his opinion. After all, according to the rules, once a military plan was formulated, even a leader like him could not casually intervene or change it. The reason why second young Master Yang was still looking at him like that was because he wanted to personally go to the battlefield. Speaking of which, this person was really wronged to be his family general. He should be leading the army to gallop on the battlefield and expand the territory. Yang Chendong did not agree to let Beta Persei follow the army. Swords had no eyes, and now there was no one more convenient by his side. He did not want to see anything happen to Beta Persei. There were many things that he had to do himself. Beta Persei, who did not get permission to fight, looked a little wronged. As a man in his 30s, he pretended to be a wronged little wife. It was difficult for the burly Beta Persei. But when he made a few consecutive actions that made him want to vomit, he found that the young master had turned around again and did not even look at him. He knew that his performance was in vain. The young master had made up his mind not to allow him to participate in the battle. He could only put away his wronged face and said to Badao Jiang, the deputy captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade who was watching the show, "Go and pass on the young master's order. Everything will be done according to the previous plan." When Ba Daojiang saw Yang Er's darkened face, he quickly put away his sinister smile and agreed with a serious expression. Then he turned around and left. According to the military plan, a part of the new Second Army's infantry division and a part of the foreign Russian army were the first to sneak into Bulgaria. The infantry division's commander, Yang Chunfeng, was a student of the Yang Family Academy in Qilian City. He was a standard Han Chinese, but he learned Mongolian and Russian well in the academy. In the final military thesis examination, he was ranked at the top. After graduation, he went directly to the army and started as a platoon leader. Along the way, he made countless contributions and became the commander of the new Second Army's infantry division. This person was rough but meticulous, and he was proficient in 3 languages. It was reassuring to leave this kind of infiltration mission to him. The commander of the White Russian division was given to Nikolaev. This person's qualifications and ability were naturally not enough, but he had a bitter background. He could unite most of the White Russians, and he was very loyal to Yang Chendong. The people of his tribe were all in the Far East region's All City. There was no need to worry about such people rebelling, so he was given the position of acting commander. Fortunately, Ahuli surrendered. This person had been a great Khan before, and Yang Chendong also gave him the opportunity to choose his own path. After he understood the structure and glorious history of the 5-star army, he finally decided to join the army and was directly appointed as the deputy commander. He cooperated with Nikolaev to manage the White Russian division. With Ahuli's help, the military had been greatly supplemented and Yang Chendong could be more at ease. The next step was to let the other party undergo the baptism of war. It would be much easier to obtain an elite army after a lot of tempering. Naturally, there would be losses in this process and a lot of people would be eliminated like sand being washed away by waves. This was the cruelty of war. This was the only way to obtain elite soldiers. This was the reason why the merciful could not command an army. Inside the Bulgar city, Yang Chuanfeng's subordinates, Nikolaev, Ahuli, and the others had already infiltrated the city. They either pretended to be passers-by or people who came to seek refuge. There were also people dressed in ragged clothes who pretended to be refugees. They were hiding in various parts of the city, waiting to coordinate with the main army from the inside. As the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde, not only would there be White Russian merchants here, but there would also be some people from small tribes in the nearby forests who would come here to buy things. There were also people who did not have anything to eat, and those who could not survive would come here to beg. They were all called refugees. It was because of this that the population of the city was not fixed. Perhaps one day there would be more refugees and the city's population would increase. The Mongolian soldiers who were in charge of security here were used to this. Of course, this had a lot to do with the pride and arrogance in their hearts. No matter what, this place belonged to the Golden Horde and no one had ever tried to attack them here. Using this loophole, no matter if it was Yang Chunfeng, Nikoliv or Ahuli, when they entered the city, they did not attract any attention. Ahuli, on the other hand, had a look of reluctance, especially when he looked at Nikoliv, who was dressed in noble clothes. He said unhappily, "Look at you, it's a waste of good clothes on you." Ahuli looked down on Nikoliv. This was a form of racial prejudice. At that time, most Mongolians looked down on the White Russians. After all, they had suppressed them for more than 200 years. But how could Nikoliv look up to Ahuli? Hearing these complaints, Nikoliv snorted and said, "I am now the acting commander, and you are only the deputy commander. According to the rank, I am higher than you and I have to listen to the commander's orders. Don't you know that?" Humph. This time Ahuli did not say anything. He just snorted to show his dissatisfaction. He was willing to join the 5-star army not because of Nikoliv. He really saw many Mongolian brothers in the 5-star army, and he heard from them that many Mongolians were living better and better under King Wunan of Daemyung. As mentioned before, Ahuli was a Mongolian Khan with his own ideas. He was a leader who wanted to let the people under his rule live a better life. To achieve this goal, he had made a lot of efforts and made a lot of concessions. For example, in the original Great Crow City, there were many White Russians there, but they had never seen him bully anyone. This was proof. He had ideas and made efforts, but the effect was not good. Later he thought about it and it was because he was not big enough. Now Yang Qindong was here. He had more ideas than him and he did things better. More importantly, he was strong enough. Not only did he have a vast territory, but he was also very rich. Ahuli, who knew all this, did not mind hitching a ride. His request was very simple. He wanted the Mongolians to live a stable life and not have to worry about food. For this goal he almost lost his life. Now he was just one of Yang Qindong's subordinates. What was so unacceptable about it? Ahuli surrendered to Yang Qindong, not Nikoliv. Especially when he found that Nikoliv had a deep prejudice against the Mongolians, he would often talk back to him. He was venting his dissatisfaction, and also reminding Nikoliv not to be prejudiced against the Mongolians. After being a Khan for so many years, he knew when to stop. This time, after reminding Nikoliv, he did not say anything. Instead, he stared at the Mongolian general's residence across the street. He had already asked around. This was the residence of the Bulgar general. If he could control this place as soon as he made a move, then everything would be much easier. After noticing Ahuli's gaze, Nikoliv's expression became much more serious. "I say, Vice Division Commander, when we make a move, can you guarantee that you can control this place?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. After all, Nikoliv was only someone from a small tribe. Although he was very brave, his experience was limited. Compared to before, when he was just a poor boy, there was too much of a difference between him and this so-called general. Where did his confidence come from? On the other hand, Ahuli's face was indifferent. He was someone who had been a Khan. What kind of situation had he not seen before? He was just a general of a city. Naturally, he would not be scared. "It's fine. When we make a move, I will be the first to rush in. You just need to bring people to guard the outside and prevent anyone from escaping." Hearing such a promise, Nikoliv nodded in relief. Although he hated the Mongols deep in his bones, if it were not for them, his tribe would not have to live such a poor life. However, he was still very confident in Ahuli's ability. Since he said so, there should not be any problems. Nikoliv, who was pretending to be a rich White Russian merchant, walked slowly on this street. From time to time, he would stop in front of some open-air stalls and ask about the price of some goods. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with it, but in fact his heart was in a mess. This was the first time he had carried out such a mission. In the past, he only thought that when two armies fought, they would pull apart their stances and compete with courage and perseverance. However, after joining the 5-star army, he realized that even if it was a war, there was a very special way. If he used it well, he could win with fewer people and win with the weak. Like a studious student, Nikoliv studied with all his might. It was because of this spirit and his innate affinity that he was able to become friends with many White Russians. Yang Qindong appointed him as a substitute teacher. The panicked Nikoliv forced himself to calm down. However, his panicked eyes still betrayed him. From time to time, he would look at the general's residence in the distance. At the same time, he kept asking himself, why hasn't the main force of the 5-star army attacked yet? As if they felt his call, the street suddenly became chaotic. Many Mongol soldiers were running towards this street. Obviously, something urgent must have happened. They were here to report. Chapter 14:19. Stop them. Out of instinct, Nicholas shouted to the people on both sides of the street. Then hundreds of strong White Russian men rushed out. Unknowingly, they had sharp cavalry swords in their hands. Seeing more and more soldiers gathering around him, Nicholas couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he thought of Ahu. He wanted to see if Ahu had already made his move. After all, he didn't have enough people with him. They wouldn't be able to hold on for long. When he turned around, he realized that the door of the great general's residence was already wide open, and he could vaguely hear the clashing sounds of swords and sabers coming from within the residence. This meant that Ahuli had already made his move. Nicholas heaved a sigh of relief. Then he turned to the White Russian soldiers who were gathering around him and said, "Hold on, don't let anyone rush into the general's mansion." As Nicholas spoke, he took a cavalry sword from one of the soldiers. Then he charged with them towards a group of 50 Mongolian soldiers. They were now warriors, and they were no longer the rootless trees from before. Recently, they had also gone through the training of battle formations. Even though they had not fully grasped it, they still managed to cut down the 50 Mongolian cavaliers with their advantage in numbers. After a quarter of an hour, only the White Russian warriors led by Nikolai were left standing on the street. Clean up the battlefield, finish off those who should be dealt with. Treat the injured soldiers immediately. Thinking about the battlefield knowledge that the soldiers of the 5-star army had taught him, Nicholas shouted out. After that, the soldiers started to get busy again. Screams of agony sounded out again. Those were the screams of the Mongol soldiers who hadn't died yet. Some of the soldiers took out the bandages they carried with them and wrapped them around the wounds of their injured comrades. Due to the limited conditions, they could only stop the bleeding first. After the battle, there would naturally be medical personnel from the 5-star army to treat them. Just as these were done, the sound of horse hooves came from afar. Nicholas looked over and his face turned ugly. It's actually the Mongolian cavalry. There are about 80 of them. Looking at his side, there were less than 70 soldiers who could still fight with light injuries. In terms of numbers, they were already inferior to the enemy, not to mention infantry against cavalry, which was a natural disadvantage. "Master, what should we do?" A few Russian officers asked Nikolai nervously. "Don't panic. Set up obstacles. Don't let the cavalry rush over so quickly." Nicholas looked to the left and right of the street, and his gaze landed on the wooden boards of the stalls. He pretended to be calm and said, "The chaos just now had already scared away the peddlers and merchants. Many people didn't even take their goods with them because they were afraid of being implicated." After receiving the order, the White Russian soldiers immediately ran to the left and right, taking out everything that could be lifted from both sides of the road and throwing them on the road to form a simple barrier. He knew that these things wouldn't last long, but he had no other choice but to do this. Right now, he could only hope that the main force of the 5-star army would arrive quickly. He hoped that Ahuli would be able to deal with the general's manner quickly. At the very least, it would be much safer to hide there. The Mongolian cavaliers who came from afar had already seen the obstacles on the road and also saw the corpses of their own soldiers. Their expressions changed drastically and they became very ugly. One of the young generals said angrily, "Release the arrows. Kill these White Russian bastards." After receiving the order, the Mongolian cavalry took out the bows on their backs and started to nock the arrows. Following this, the sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out as they flew towards the White Russian soldiers. "Find a place to hide quick," Nicholas shouted as he hid behind a thick wooden board. Just as he finished doing that, the arrows fell and hit the wooden board, creating a series of banging sounds. As a race that grew up on horseback, the Mongolian cavalry's archery skills were very high, and there were very few who could match them. When this wave of arrows came, many of the White Russian soldiers were hit because they didn't hide well enough. There were also some who didn't find a suitable place to hide, and the arrows still pierced through their bodies. Cries of agony rang out around him, which meant that more and more White Russian soldiers had lost their lives. Hearing this, Nikolai bit his lips. His right hand gripped the saber so tightly that it turned white. After a few rounds of arrows, the Mongolian cavalry had arrived in front of the obstacles. Following this, the cavalry at the front dismounted and started to move the objects. There were also some bleeding corpses. Kill. Feeling the Mongolian cavalry's aura getting closer and closer, Nicholas looked through the gap between the cover and saw that the distance between them was less than 6 meters. He knew that this was the best time to counterattack, so he shouted and led the 30 or so White Russian soldiers who weren't injured to charge out. The sudden battle cry did not cause the Mongolian soldiers to panic. On the contrary, one of them even smiled savagely and charged at Nicholas with a machete. An instant later, the two sides clashed and the cruel battle of life and death began. As both sides fought, the Mongolian cavalry were unable to shoot their arrows. They simply dismounted and charged over. They wanted to surround Nicholas and the others and kill them all. They did not want to let a single one of them escape. Facing the Mongolian soldiers getting closer and closer, Nicholas only turned around to look at the general's manner before giving up on the idea of entering. He did not want to be looked down on by a huli, and he did not want to be a burden to him. Soldiers, let's go all out. Our names have already been registered. Even if we die in this battle, our families and people in Bugnam of Gojoseon will take care of us. Even if we die, what is there to fear? Seeing that more than 10 of his brothers had died in the battle in a short period of time, Nicholas knew that they were doomed this time. Therefore he simply gave up on his fantasy and roared loudly with the thought that killing one was enough to break even, and killing two was a win for him. After joining the 5-star army, they had to register. Even if they were just auxiliary soldiers, this way if something happened to them, their heirs would be able to receive compensation from the 5-star army. This was a form of protection for everyone, and they would not have to worry about what happened after they died on the battlefield. In the past, when there was a war between tribes, if one died, then one's wife and children would become slaves. Now, they were people with an organization. If something happened, not only would their families be able to receive compensation, if someone dared to bully the family of a martyr, they would just have to find an official and someone would support them. It was because of these policies that no one had ever heard of or even thought about before that when Yang Qindong said that he wanted to establish a division outside of Russia, the enthusiasm of the applicants far exceeded everyone's expectations. These people were carefully selected, and those who were not in their prime were not accepted. Otherwise, not to mention 20,000 people, even an army of 50,000 could be gathered. Hearing Nikolaev's shout, the remaining dozen people also had a look of determination to die. Since everything had been arranged, what else was there to worry about? They would just kill. As the saying went, the soft feared the hard feared the unreasonable, and the unreasonable feared those who did not care about their lives. When the dozen Russian soldiers became fugitives, facing the Mongol soldiers who were many times their number, they no longer defended. Instead, they continuously attacked, and the momentum of the Mongol soldiers became sluggish, and they could not help but take a few steps back. Only then did they avoid the Russian soldiers. Come, isn't it just death? Who's afraid of who? Nikolaev borrowed the momentum from before to cut down 2 Mongolian soldiers. At this moment his momentum was at its peak, and when he spoke his voice was a bit louder. Lunatics, a bunch of lunatics. Don't waste words with them, just shoot them to death. When the Mongol soldiers saw that Nikolaev and his men were not afraid of death and wanted to drag them down with them, they shook their heads and retreated to open up the distance between them. At the same time they took out their bows and arrows and prepared to shoot. Seeing the Mongol soldiers take out their bows and arrows, Nikolaev was shocked and quickly tried to find cover. However, in such a short period of time, where could he hide? Just as he thought that he was going to die, a voice suddenly shouted, "Put down your weapons immediately, otherwise your general will die in front of you." The one who shouted was Ahuli. At this moment he had already walked out of the general's residence, and in his right hand he was holding the Mongol general. In that short period of time he had brought his own personal guards into the residence, and after a fierce battle he had captured the enemy general. It was only because Bulgar city had not been in a war for many years that there were less than 50 soldiers defending the residence that Ahuli was able to deal with them in such a short period of time, saving Nikolaev's life. With their general being held hostage, the faces of the Mongol soldiers turned ugly. When they saw that the saber on their general's neck was about to be pulled at any moment, they had no choice but to put down their bows. "Many thanks." Nikolaev, who was still in shock, walked to Ahuli's side and said in an unnatural manner, "If you really want to thank me, why don't you let me be your division commander?" Ahuli suddenly made a request. Nikolaev was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and shook his head. The acting division commander is personally appointed by Bugnam of Gojosian. If you have the ability, go find Bugnam of Gojosian to change your military order. Don't worry, the position of division commander will be mine sooner or later. Ahuli said without a care. The two of them were still bickering, but after what happened just now, it was obvious that their relationship had become much closer. In the words of the future, they had formed a revolutionary friendship. Chapter 1420. With the Mongolian general under control, Yang Chunfeng led the 5-star army hidden in the city and took down the unguarded city gate. Without a unified command, the Mongolian army fell into chaos. Then a large number of new Second Army cavalry soldiers rushed into the city of Bulgar. From then on, the city was surnamed Yang, forever separated from the territory of the Golden Horde. By the time Yang Qindong entered the city under the protection of the Black Cavalry, the security of the city had returned to normal. With strict military rules, no soldier dared to disturb the people. When the city was taken, only the Mongolian soldiers were hurt. The city is not big, but the population is not small. Yang Qindong walked on the street looking around casually, then shook his head gently. Yes, I heard that Bulgar is the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde. Many people living nearby often come here to exchange for what they need. Beta Persei told Yang Qindong some of the things he learned before. It's a pity that the Mongolians seem to be used to a nomadic lifestyle. They don't know how to make use of such good conditions. Haha, but this time we are here, everything is different. Watch how I build a big city here. A sufficient population and abundant untapped resources. All of these were boundless wealth in Yang Qindong's hands. Beta Persei naturally believed Yang Qindong's words. He nodded heavily and said flatteringly, "Of course, who is the young master? There is only one such person in the world." Yang Qindong, who was elated by this sentence, laughed and said, "Well, young heir, you're so good at complimenting people. Well, tell me, do you have something to ask of the young master?" He was in a good mood and also joked. This. Beta Persei rubbed his hands and looked at Yang Qindong with a smile and said, "Young master, it is said that the Mongolian cavalry is good at charging. If you want to fight with them this time, can you let me lead the charge?" He knew that Beta Persei wanted to lead the army. He was a person who loved to fight and kill. Yang Qindong sighed and thought about it before agreeing. "Well, if that's the case, I will arrange it for the young master when there is a chance." "Thank you, young master, thank you, young master." Beta Persei, who got Yang Qindong's agreement, immediately smiled. He felt that he was getting older and older. He was afraid that if he wanted to go on the battlefield, the chances would only get fewer and fewer. Since that was the case, he should take advantage of his youth and strength to perform well. When he got older and had a group of children and grandchildren, he would have something to brag about. Yang Qindong didn't know what Beta Persei was thinking. As someone close to him and his own family, he would take care of him if he had the chance. Although charging on the battlefield was very dangerous, it was not enough to make him worry about Beta Persei. After all, his status was there and there would be many people to protect him on the battlefield. What he needed to do now was to consider his next move. If taking down Bulgar was revenge on the Golden Horde for daring to attack Wuxia's Third Army, then destroying the entire Golden Horde was a necessary step for him to take over the world and make the Han Chinese the king of the world. Beta Persei passed down the order. All officers of the deputy division level and above should go to the general's mansion in the city for a meeting. Yang Qindong already had various ideas in his mind, and it was time for him to implement these decisions. The meeting was held in the general's mansion. Yang Qindong presided over the meeting, and he announced a series of military and city governance policies. 2 hours later, the generals received their orders and left. Then the granary in the city was opened. But unlike other places, this time they did not open the granary to release grain, but bartered with grain. To put it bluntly, it was to let the people bring all kinds of things to the general's mansion to sell, and then buy them in the form of Han coins. Then the people took these Han coins to the granary to buy grain and daily necessities. For example, refined salt, white sugar, soy sauce, and iron pots. The 5-star army also bought all kinds of things such as scrap metal, used weapons, and the furs of the wild beasts in the mountains, as well as horses and sheep. The entire Golden Horde's territory did not lack mountains and dense forests. Before it was explored, the number of wild beasts in the mountains could be compared to a wild zoo in the future. As long as one was willing to take the risk, fighting a few tigers and black bears would not be a problem. Naturally, these furs were not worth much here, but if they were brought to the other inland provinces of Xianxia, it would be completely different. They could be sold for a high price, and it was possible to sell them for a few hundred times more than buying them. There was also a lot of rare mahogany in the mountains. The growth process of this kind of wood was slow, but it was abnormally strong. Furniture made of this wood could be sold for a sky-high price. And it just so happened that no one cared about the value of this item, so Yang Qindong did not hesitate to accept it. Using Han coins to buy mahogany was definitely a profitable thing. As for horses, cows and sheep, there were even more. The main thing was that the Mongolian people were not willing to take them out. However, using refined salt as bait should not be a problem. As for the used weapons, they were naturally useless in the hands of the people, but after they were sent back to Xichen City, they could be used again and become good things. In short, they chose the things that the commoners thought were worthless in exchange for the things that they needed. This was a win-win situation. Ahuli had heard Yang Qindong's detailed explanation during the meeting. Then he requested to stay at the general's residence to cooperate with the purchase. When the news came out, many people responded enthusiastically. They took the items that Yang Qindong wanted and exchanged them for a large amount of Han coins, then went back to the granary to buy what they needed. Ahuli's eyes widened. He saw the enthusiasm of the people, the huddling of the people, and the support of the people. This matter was fully in charge of the sacrifice. Speaking of which, he could be considered an all-rounder in both military and civilian affairs. When you get on a horse to conquer the world, when you get off a horse to rule the world, you get off a horse to rule the world. When he saw Ahuli's excited and enlightened expression, he patted his shoulder and said, "Learn, the great Bugnam of Gojosian is omnipotent." Yes, Bugnam of Gojosian is too amazing. This move not only allowed the people to quickly accept the new currency, but also received sincere praise and support from the people. Presumably, after this incident, the people no longer want the 5-star army to leave this place. If someone insists on doing this, then they will become the common enemy of the people. Ahuli was indeed a smart person. From this incident he was able to see deeper things. Hearing this, Ahuli kept nodding. Then when he looked to the south, he was already thinking that Yang Qindong would not have a problem conquering the Golden Horde. The question was how long it would take. At first he was still not confident that he could defeat the Golden Horde and the Rossi principalities with only a few 100,000 soldiers. But now he knew that once he won the hearts of the people, he could get as many soldiers as he wanted. In the past he always heard Yang Qindong say that the people were the foundation and the people were the foundation. He also knew this principle, including the saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. This was the principle of the ancient sages. But why did so many people say that only Yang Qindong could do it? Shibi had thought about this before and finally came to a conclusion. That was, other people were just saying these words. The so-called people in their eyes were the upper-class people with the right to speak, especially the landowning households and the noble families. In Yang Qindong's eyes, the people were the real people. They were the lowest class of people. They were the people who were called lowly and could be sacrificed at any time. They were the people who were looked down upon by others. It might seem that Yang Qindong was wrong, but in reality the people at the bottom were the most common. Without them there would be no one to farm, no one to do business, and no one to create things. The so-called high and mighty people were not far from starving and freezing to death. To borrow Teacher Guo's words, this was the difference between vulgarity and elegance. Elegance could not be separated from vulgarity, but vulgarity could be separated from elegance. Bulgar City, because of a series of measures, became lively again. On the streets, people could be seen taking their things to the general's mansion to exchange for Chinese currency. Then they took the Chinese currency to the granary to buy rice, salt, sugar, soy sauce, and iron pots. Especially when the courageous commoners had already bought the goods they needed with Chinese currency and walked proudly on the streets, the decree became a reality. More and more commoners were moved and started to take action. But the people here were too poor. There were still many people who were poor and had nothing. What could they do? It was simple. They could sell their labor to earn money. For example, they could become soldiers. As long as one signed up and passed the 5-star army's test, they would become a glorious member of the 5-star army. At the same time, they would be able to receive a monthly salary. Furthermore, they would be able to provide for 3 or 4 people in an ordinary family. Even if they couldn't provide for 8 or 10 people, they could at least provide for 3 or 4 people in an ordinary family. Men who were past the age could choose to work to earn money. Bulgar city was still too small. Yang Qindong was preparing to expand the city. This required manpower. Also, transporting all kinds of military supplies required labor. This was a lack of work. It was the same for women. They could weave and wash clothes for the soldiers. There were also some young women who did not have any attachments. They could go and work for the army. On this point, Yang Qindong was open to the foreign races. Apart from the fact that he could not force the women to work for the army and that there could not be any Han women, if the foreign race women were willing, he would not oppose it. The soldiers worked hard on the expedition. Every day, other than rushing, training and fighting, there was nothing else to do. In addition, when they first came here, even the female soldiers of the propaganda team did not follow them. Their days were incomparably boring. It was necessary for them to relax their minds and bodies. Otherwise, it would be easy for problems to arise. Chapter 1421. Just like that, the 5-star army was formed. Furthermore, the treatment of the soldiers of the 5-star army was not low, and money was easy to earn. The only condition was that these women had to be healthy, and they had to be able to withstand investigation. If they were spies sent by the enemy, they would be killed as soon as they were discovered. They would not be soft-hearted. In short, after Yang Qindong became the ruler of Bulgar, it was as if the sky had changed. The people had more choices and there were more varieties and colors of food on their tables. Not long after, more and more logistics teams arrived in Bulgar. More and more goods appeared in the city, dazzling the eyes of the foreign races. Right now, they could only hate the fact that they did not have enough Chinese currency and could not buy everything they wanted. The transport team came and went in batches. When they came, they brought all kinds of supplies and rations. When they left, they brought with them all kinds of animal hides, scrap metal and carriages of mahogany. Once these things were transported back to Crimson City, it would not take long for their value to increase by tens of times. At the very least, it would be enough to cover the expenses of the people and horses. In the past few years, potatoes, sweet potatoes, corn and other high-yield crops were discovered. What Xianxia did not lack the least was food. The granaries of the various provinces were almost filled to the brim. Now that they could use food to exchange for the rare hides of the Central Plains, it could be considered a form of income. Not to mention the furniture made of mahogany. When brought back to Crimson City, they would be in high demand. They would not worry about not being able to sell them, but they would worry about not having enough. This was equivalent to using the money from trade to fight a war. This was also a manifestation of how knowledge could change one's fate. While others were still worrying about the cost of fighting a war, Yang Qindong could already make a fortune through fighting a war. With enough money and food, he would naturally have the confidence to fight a war. With money and rewards, the soldiers would want to perform meritorious deeds. This was a kind of virtuous cycle. How could it not be powerful? Just like when Yang Qindong was winning the hearts of the people and making money in Bulgar city, the new Second Army, under the leadership of several division commanders, had already begun to expand their territory. Before anyone knew that they had arrived, they had launched continuous attacks on cities and territories. Setting out from Bulgar city, they headed south. Within 2 months, they had taken down Kot city, Kilo city and Kazan city, all the way to Samara city. Samara was the entrance to Sarai city, the capital of the Golden Horde. In other words, once this place was conquered, the safety of the Golden Horde's capital would be directly threatened. This was something that Great Khan Mahama would never allow to happen. It was only a month ago that Mahama, who had escaped from Kot city, found out about the fall of Bulgar city. The furious Mahama couldn't understand why the 5-star army's reinforcements had come so quickly, nor why they had the guts to cause trouble for the Golden Horde. Speaking of which, Mahama was a very domineering person. Ever since he became the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde, although the strength of the Rossi Duchy was slowly rising, he had always been in a position to suppress them. In history, when the Rossi Duchy became independent, this great Khan had already passed away many years ago. Of course, the main reason why the Rossi Duchy became independent was because the Golden Horde had begun to split, which gave them an opportunity to take advantage of. Perhaps because of his experience, Mahama was a very conceited person. He had always been the one bullying others. Since when did others have the chance to find trouble with him? After learning about this, he first reprimanded his generals for their incompetence. How could they not have received the news that such an important city like Bulgar City had been lost? At the same time, he hurriedly mobilized all the troops stationed at the border of the Rossi Duchy from the west to the north. He wanted to take care of the five-star army first and let them know who was the real king in this realm. This time, Mahama ordered his general, Gray, to lead 50,000 elite cavalrymen to Samara city and make preparations for the five-star army's arrival. Mahama and his generals had already analyzed the situation. As an outsider, the King Wunan of Daimyong would not be able to fight a protracted battle with them. Just the cold winter temperature alone was not something they could handle. Therefore, the other party would definitely think of a way to end the battle quickly. Since that was the case, all they had to do was wait for the other party to arrive. The terrain outside Kazan City was wide and suitable for a cavalry charge. When the time came, he would let this outsider know that the so-called Great Ming Dynasty was just a two-legged sheep after so many years. As the descendants of Genghis Khan, the Golden Horde did not lack elite cavalrymen. They were good at war and came and went like the wind, giving people a headache. Even the Rossi Duchy, which had a certain number of firearms, had a headache. Speaking of the Rossi Duchy, after Ivan's army was defeated in Tove City, he returned to Moscow unwillingly. Not long after he entered the city, he received news that after Wu Sheng's Third Army and the Five-Star Army's reinforcements met up, they left the destroyed Tove City and headed for Oxino City, occupying it. While they were recuperating, they were like a tiger watching a nail over the Rossi Duchy. As the saying goes, how could one allow others to sleep beside one's bed? The Five-Star Army's actions were seen as a threat and a provocation by the Rossi people. Not long after Ivan entered the city, he received news that his father-in-law was going to send troops to eliminate the Five-Star Army. At the very least, they were going to be chased out. With regards to his father-in-law's decision, Ivan raised both his hands in approval. Especially after fighting a battle with them and witnessing their abilities, he was even more convinced. In his eyes, the Five-Star Army was an existence that was on par with the Golden Horde. In the main hall, when Ivan arrived, all his generals were already standing there. They were listening to Vanya's report on the Battle of Tove City. Vanya knew the importance of this matter, so he did not exaggerate. Instead, he reported the entire battle truthfully. At the end of his report, he even said, "I don't think there was anything wrong with our command in this battle. I can only say that the Five-Star Army's cavalry was too strong. The Five-Star Army's ability was even stronger than the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde. They were not even afraid of the rumbling of cannons. They were a terrifying opponent. Stronger than the cavalry of the Golden Horde." After these words were spoken, many people in the imperial court chuckled. It was no wonder that they thought so. The Golden Horde was one of the purest descendants of the Mongol army. Many of their cavalry started practicing archery when they first learned how to walk. Who could possibly be their opponent? In the face of such mocking laughter, Vanya did not respond. On the contrary, he maintained his silence. This was his way of protecting himself. The reason why he was not a direct descendant of the Grand Duke of Blindness, but still had his own position in the court, and others could not do anything to him, was because of this caution and carefulness. After all, he had already spoken the truth. As for whether they believed it or not, it had nothing to do with him. Seeing that Vanya did not respond, Ivan, who had just arrived, was not happy. His face darkened as he said, "Everyone, there is nothing funny about this. The strength of the Five-Star Army's cavalry will only be beyond your imagination." It would have been better if Ivan did not speak. His words caused even more laughter. What's going on? The smart Ivan sensed that something was wrong. He also did not know that when the news of his defeat came, Tugnev of the Vyatka city said in the court that their young master would definitely exaggerate the strength of the Five-Star Army's reinforcements to reduce his own guilt. At that time, many people heard it. Now that Ivan said it like this, wasn't it a confirmation of his words? Everyone recalled Tugnev's words. No wonder they laughed so loudly. The blind Grand Duke was also present that day. He also heard what Ivan said. When he saw his son Ivan jump out, his expression was not good. "Ivan, it's good that you're back. This battle has been hard on you. Go back and have a good rest. This was telling him that he would not be needed in the upcoming battle against the 5-star army. How could Ivan be willing to let this go? He immediately wanted to refute loudly, "Father-in-law, your son. Enough, this is an order, not a discussion." The blind Grand Duke displayed the dignity that a person in his position should have. Then he ignored Ivan and asked the ministers, "Oxino City is our territory. Our citizens are there. We must take it back. Who is willing to lead troops to complete this extermination mission?" Tugnev, who had long wanted to show off his skills, was waiting for these words. He immediately stepped out and said, "This general is willing." Speaking of which, Oxino City was actually one of Tugnev's areas of influence. If there was trouble there, as the true master, he definitely could not stand by and do nothing. The court meeting ended. Ivan was left behind to meet with his father alone. When there was no one else around, Ivan looked at his father with an unconvinced expression. He believed that his wise father-in-law would definitely give him a reason. "Are you unconvinced?" Although his vision was limited, especially in his left eye, the Grand Duke of Blindness could still sense Ivan's dissatisfaction. Ifan didn't hold back. He was indeed very emotional. "Father-in-law, what your son said is true. This 5-star army cavalry is very strong. If we don't pay attention to them, our army will definitely be at a disadvantage. Father-in-law believes what you said." Before Ivan could continue, the blind Grand Duke had already concluded. This time Ivan was at a loss for what to do. Fortunately, the blind Grand Duke continued speaking. "Since you are so sure, what is there to worry about? Some people will definitely hit a nail on the head. Some people will definitely look down on their opponents. Since that is the case, why not let them suffer some losses? Whether it is the 5-star army's defeat or Tugnev's defeat, it is not a bad thing for our duchy, is it not?" Chapter 1422. At this moment, Ivan suddenly realized that his father-in-law wanted to use the 5-star army to wear down Turgenev's strength. "Sai, you should know that your father-in-law has been painstakingly managing the Rossi principalities all these years, but not everyone supports our actions. For example, Maxim, Turgenev, and Vanya are the representatives. They have their own territories, their own forces, and even their own armies. They also have a group of nobles who are dissatisfied with us supporting them. Unless there is a legitimate reason, we can't do anything to them. If that's the case, why don't we let them fight the 5-star army? Just as you said, the opponent is very strong. Let them fight it out among themselves. When the time comes, whoever wins or loses will be beneficial to us." This was the Duke's plan. Ivan finally understood and was in a good mood. "Father-in-law, I was wrong." Seeing that his son understood his father's decision so quickly, the blind Duke was also very happy. But then he asked worriedly, "Is the 5-star army's cavalry really that strong? Turgenev won't defeat them, right?" "Absolutely not. If we are cautious, we might be able to use a large number of cannons and double the number of soldiers, but with Turgenev's arrogance we will definitely lose," Ivan said with an incomparably resolute tone. As for Turgenev, after receiving the military order in the court, he returned to his residence in high spirits and began to mobilize his troops. He didn't believe Ivan's words. As for Vanya, although he was also on their side, he had always been timid and cautious. His words were also not trustworthy. This time he wanted to teach the 5-star army a lesson and let them know who was the real strong on the battlefield. He wasn't the only one who thought so. The nobles who supported Turgenev also had the same opinion. Although they didn't have much contact with the Han army, they had fought with the Golden Horde for more than 200 years. From their words, it was clear who was stronger between the White Russians and the Han army. The Han people were called two-legged sheep by the Golden Horde. According to them, when faced with the attack of the Mongol cavalry, the Han people either fled or surrendered. They didn't even have the courage to resist. In comparison, the White Russians were much more courageous. Didn't this prove that they were stronger than the Han army? With the support of the nobles, provisions were naturally no longer a problem. Turgenev took his own 80,000 soldiers and the 20,000 soldiers he got from the Grand Duke of the Blind, a total of 100,000 people, 100 cannons and 10,000 muskets to the north. In Kazan City, Yang Qindong arrived at the city under the protection of the Black Cavalry. Behind him, not only had Bulgar been liberated and a large amount of trade had begun. Even Kot City and Kilo City, which had been taken down, had also begun to reform. The people of the Golden Horde, who had always relied on the heavens for food, didn't know that there were so many good things in the world. Moreover, they didn't need to fight or risk their lives. As long as they worked hard, they could obtain all of this. With food and water and the hope of a better life, the three cities were quickly stabilized and more Mongolian citizens were willing to work for them. Regardless of whether it was building the city, reclaiming the land, building roads, or mining, they were all very enthusiastic. Just like what Yang Qindong said before, these people had been suffering for too long. Now, as long as they put in some effort, no one would be stupid enough to go against the five-star army. In the face of a bright future, the so-called ethnic background was worthless. If they didn't study, they wouldn't have the wisdom of the people. These people also had their own advantages. It was very simple to distinguish right from wrong. They would help whoever was good to them. As for ethnic background, the barbarians didn't care too much about it. Of course, there were some troublemakers among them. Yang Qindong didn't show any mercy to these people. He killed those who needed to be killed and captured those who needed to be captured. After purposefully removing the troublemakers, the rest of the Mongol people became very obedient. They also received a lot of benefits and their living conditions improved. Now, many Mongol people were worried about how long this kind of life could last. After all, the land they occupied was the territory of the Golden Horde. If the Great Khan brought his army over, would the Han army be able to withstand it? Yang Qindong didn't know whether to laugh or cry at this kind of worry. However, this was a good thing. In order to solve the worries and doubts in everyone's hearts, Yang Qindong personally came to Kazan City and went to the front line. He used his actions to tell those who had doubts in their hearts that he was at the front line. If there was any danger, it would be directed at him. Everyone could rest assured and develop in peace. They could work hard to support their families and strive for a better life. As soon as he arrived at Kazan City, a telegram came from Xianxia City. It could be said that there was good news one after another. After the first successful steam engine, the field artillery was also successfully produced in batches. This had entered the final stage of development before Yang Qindong left. Now all kinds of difficulties had been overcome and it was successfully produced. The credit for this was also due to the efforts of the first city. Yumian and Tiger's Mane fully implemented his ideas. After the first city was completely stabilized, a large number of mining operations began. For a time, a lot of iron, copper, molybdenum, coal, zinc, gold, lead, and tungsten were developed and transported to Xianxia City through the three eastern provinces. With sufficient raw materials, all kinds of experiments took a big step forward and the success rate began to increase. After ruling Crimson City for more than a decade, Yang Qindong had invested a huge sum of money into it. Now that he was finally reaping the rewards, Yang Qindong could not help but breathe a sigh of relief. The emergence of all kinds of advanced products meant that Xianxia had taken a key step from light industry to heavy industry. The world was still dominated by cold weapons and firearms were just in a budding state. Xianxia's various scientific research results were undoubtedly the most advanced among them. What was there to be afraid of? Just like the field artillery, it was named by Yang Qindong, but it first appeared in history in 1897. A French artillery research team formed by General Douiville, Colonel de Boer, and Captain Romeo invented the 75mm field artillery. This was the world's first modern cannon in history. The 75mm field artillery was developed according to the patent of the German Hausen. It used the long recoil principle, but Germany refused to use long recoil cannons. This kind of field artillery had a powerful power. The 75mm cannon was the first field artillery that completely solved the recoil problem. The cannon body could be slid on a cradle through a guide wheel. The cradle was mounted on the cannon frame, and the cannon frame was connected to the piston rod in the cylinder. When the cannon was recoiled, the piston would compress the hydraulic oil, and a portion of the hydraulic oil would enter the chamber through a small valve to compress the air. When the cannon reached the end of the recoil, the compressed air would return to its original position. This was the main reason why the 75mm field artillery was so good. Now Yang Qindong was the first to have it. This was the first time other than Daikra that a large cannon had been successfully created. Compared to Daikra's cannon, which required all kinds of excuses to be taken out, the appearance of the field artillery was undoubtedly a very important step forward. Although this type of cannon could only fire iron bullets, it was created through his own hard work. It was also a big step forward. Send a message to the Xianxia City Munitions Factory to continue to develop explosive bullets based on the original iron bullets. Send a message to City Lord Zhou Xian to coordinate with the relevant departments and find a way to move a portion of the munitions factory to the city and build it nearby. Send a message to Tigers Mane and Yangtze to keep a close eye on the munitions factory, especially to prevent spies from entering. If the technology is leaked, they will be killed. Also, send a message to the governor of the 3 eastern provinces, Liu Ji and General Yi Ligong. Tell them to do their best to transport the field artillery and send a batch to us as soon as possible. Yang Qindong, who gave a series of orders, wiped his fists. He couldn't wait to see the field artillery that could shoot up to 6 miles away in his hands, and the moment it showed its power on the battlefield. After dealing with these matters, the reform of Kazan City began. With the experience of the previous 3 cities, everything was carried out in an orderly manner. Other than a portion of the army, the rest of the army was ready to go all out against the Golden Horde's army. Originally, Yang Qindong wanted to use the 100mm mortar in Daikra to attack Salai City and directly threaten the Golden Horde's Xinjiang. But after receiving the news of the field artillery, he decided to wait. If he could use the artillery to deal with the enemy, why would he need the soldiers to fight on the battlefield? So after arriving at Kazan City, he stopped here and did not move forward. He only waited for the artillery to arrive before carrying out the next step of the military operation. And now what he needed to do most was to prepare for the winter. Yes, although it was only the beginning of July and the weather was very hot, it was still necessary to prepare for the winter. This was due to the climate in Eastern Europe. Winter alone lasted for half a year, which was one of the main reasons for the poverty here. Without enough time to do what needed to be done, it was indeed difficult to develop. In order to live well in the winter, a source of fire was indispensable, and warm clothes were also indispensable. Yang Qindong had already started to prepare for these. A large number of cotton-padded clothes and high-grade down jackets were made by the Xianxia City Clothing Factory and sent here. Some of the coal mines near Bulgar City were also located by Yang Qindong and were being mined. There were also some coal furnaces built by the ironware factory in Xianxia City that were being transported. Even some greenhouses were being built so that there would be enough sparse vegetables in the winter. Chapter 1423. Yang Qindong was doing everything he could think of to prepare for winter. He wanted to use his actions to show everyone that the winter here was not difficult. As long as they were prepared enough, it was possible to make the outside cold and the inside warm. As long as they got used to living here, the fertile black soil was a treasure. They could grow all sorts of crops with higher yields and better food. Yang Qindong did not move forward after arriving at Kazan City. This scene was seen by the Golden Horde and they were very confused. They did not understand why the 2-legged sheep were not moving forward. Were they afraid, or did they know that they were prepared to teach them a lesson in front of Samara, and did not dare to come? Alright, since you're not coming, we'll go, right? General Gray decided to give up on defending and take the initiative to attack. For this reason, he mobilized the army to find 30,000 White Russians and captured them to serve the army. Capturing slaves to charge into the army was a tradition of the Mongolian cavalry. Usually, the slaves could be used to transport military supplies for them, and in battle they could be used to charge at the front and attract the enemy's arrows and guns. In a chaotic world, human lives were cheap. The Mongolian cavalry had never treated the White Russians as human lives. The moment he set out, the scouts reported back. This made Yang Qindong, who was prepared to defend the city, see an opportunity. He decided to change his strategy of only defending the city. Nothing in the world was difficult for those who set their minds to it. Many things had 2 sides to them. One side was good and the other side was bad. It was just that most people could not see it. If it was only the Mongolian cavalry, Yang Qindong decided to defend with the city walls and not attack them. He would just let them attack and deplete their strength. But there were 30,000 White Russians among them. That was a completely different story. Yang Qindong's next big move was all about manpower. These 30,000 people were right in front of him. How could he not take them? Not only that, but after considering the cost, he decided to take all 50,000 Mongolian cavalry. This way the lack of manpower would be greatly reduced. Yang Qindong summoned a group of high-ranking officers and gave them orders one by one. Xiao Feng, the commander of Cold Front's 2nd Division who had just arrived, looked very excited. As one of the first officers to follow Yang Qindong, Xiao Feng had been holding his breath all these years. It seemed like the 6th young master trusted him and handed over the security of Laos, Vietnam, Cambodia and other provinces to him. Usually he only needed to lead the elite Cold Front to travel between these provinces and show his head from time to time to intimidate some people. It might seem like a lot of work, but in reality, letting the most elite Cold Front do this was like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. Especially when he saw the other brotherly armies and even many of the armies that were established later on, starting to gain merit one after another. Xiao Feng had requested for more than one battle from the army headquarters. He had even requested for a battle from Yang Qindong. But because of work reasons he had not been transferred. 10 years passed just like that. Vietnam and the other provinces had completely stabilized. The people who moved here from other places had already gotten used to the way of life and social order here. The only thing left for Cold Front's 2nd Division to do was to train and train. Just as many aspiring soldiers were complaining endlessly, and many of them even began to request for transfer, Yang Qindong's telegram finally arrived. He still remembered that day. Xiao Feng's face was covered in tears as he knelt on the ground emotionally. After receiving Yang Qindong's orders, Cold Front's 2nd Division did not delay at all. Other than not being able to do anything on the ship, once they arrived on land, they rushed to Eastern Europe as fast as they could. They were afraid that Yang Qindong would change his mind at night and that they would not be able to make it in time for the big battle. Just like that, 20 days in advance, Cold Front's 2nd Division reported to Yang Qindong and was fortunate enough to make it in time for the big battle. In the military meeting just now, according to Yang Qindong's military plan, Cold Front's 2nd Division was clearly the main force. Although it seemed like they were under a lot of pressure, Xiao Feng did not even frown. The harder the mission, the more it proved the ability of Cold Front's 2nd Division. The 5-star army was waiting in formation. The Mongol cavalry did not rush and appeared in Kazan City 7 days later. This did not mean that they did not want to move faster. It was just that the 30,000 White Russian slaves seemed to know their fate. They walked extremely slowly as if they were being chased. They walked for over 200 miles in 7 days. Using these 7 days, the 5-star army had made all sorts of preparations for the big battle. Now they were just waiting for the prey to appear so that they could reel in the net. Gray did not know about all this. He was still fantasizing about defeating these 2-legged sheep and waiting for the Khan's praise and rewards when he returned. 8 miles below Kazan City, there was a relatively wide open space that could accommodate tens of thousands of cavalry. This was the place that Gray had set up camp for the army. Although it was a little far from the city gate, he had brought all the cavalry. As long as the siege went smoothly, it would not affect the cavalry's final charge. After choosing the camp, Gray ordered the army to take the time to rest. He wanted to attack Kazan City the next morning. He wanted to end the battle quickly. He wanted to tell everyone that 2-legged sheep were still 2-legged sheep. No matter how strong they were still sheep in front of wolves. The Mongol army settled down and quickly fell asleep. However, the 5-star army did not rest. They had already slept during the day. To them it was time to work at night. Using the moonlight, the 5-star army soldiers continuously exited the city and formed a huge encirclement around the Mongol cavalry camp 8 miles away. Yang Qindong did not have the intention to launch a night attack. From his point of view, they could still win if they did so. However, the price they had to pay would be too high and the rewards would be too little. This was not what he wanted. What he wanted was a complete victory and not just defeating the enemy. At the Mongol army's camp, there were already scouts who had discovered the actions of the 5-star army. They quickly reported it to General Gray, who had just laid down. He was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. At the same time he asked his subordinates, "Are the barricades and other items prepared?" "General, don't worry. Everything has been arranged. If the 5-star army doesn't come, then forget it. If they come, we will teach them how to behave." The general in charge of night duty said arrogantly. "Very good. However, we cannot be careless. How about this? Transfer another 10,000 cavalry over and let them defend with you. If the 5-star army sneaks into the camp, then fight them back. Of course, if they don't sneak into the camp, don't act rashly. After all, it's already dark. If we attack rashly, it's easy to fall into their trap. Although Gray was conceited, he still had a cautious side to him when it came to fighting a real battle. Yes. The Mongol general placed his right hand in front of his chest and bowed before turning around to make arrangements. Gray, who was left behind, was unable to fall asleep. Instead, he laid on the bed with his clothes on. As long as there was any movement, he would be able to jump up and command the army. As he waited anxiously, the night passed. Nothing happened. Gray didn't know when he had fallen asleep. When he opened his eyes again, the sky was already bright. He suddenly thought of something and hurriedly went out of the tent. When he saw that the army outside the tent was normal and the soldiers were preparing breakfast, he couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. It seemed like he was not sleeping too deeply. Instead, there was really no battle. Why did the five-star army leave the city in the middle of the night? The answer was quickly revealed. Just as the 30,000 White Russian slaves and 50,000 Mongol cavalrymen were eating breakfast and preparing for the big battle, soldiers started to appear around their camp. There were infantry, cavalry, Han Chinese, Mongols, White Russians, and warriors from some unknown ethnic groups. After a rough calculation, other than the road to Kazan City in the north, there were at least 20,000 soldiers on each of the other three sides. In total, there were 60,000 soldiers surrounding them. Ha 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 ha. After Gray received the accurate information, he could not help but laugh out loud. 60,000 soldiers surrounding his 80,000 soldiers. What was the Han army doing? Was this a joke? Did they not know that there was no way to hide the truth? Come, send out 5,000 cavalrymen to attack the right side. I want to see who in the world can be our opponent. Gray said with a face of confidence. The generals under him immediately obeyed. A group of 5,000 Mongol cavalrymen left the main camp and started to gather on the right side of the army. The five-star army on the right side had roughly 20,000 men. They were made up of the 2 regiments of the new Second Army, the 3 battalions of the 2nd Cold Front Division, 1,200 men, and the White Russian Division, 15,000 of which were cavalry and 10,000 of which were infantry. After taking down the 4 cities of Kazan, the White Russian Division's numbers had grown. They had gone from 20,000 men to 60,000 now. Although their fighting strength had not been fully formed, and they had not been tested by war, when they all stood out, they gave off a strong aura. The one in charge of the safety of the right side was the 2nd Regiment commander of the 2nd Cold Front Division, Zhou Xian. When he saw the Mongol army gathering their troops and charging towards them, a smile appeared on his face. Ah, good timing, good timing. Come, Cold Front Division soldiers, get ready to shoot. New 2nd Army cavalry, get ready to charge. White Russians, get ready to clean up the battlefield. Knowing what his mission was, Zhou Xian laughed out loud as he made arrangements for his troops. After which, he personally walked in front of a light machine gun and got into a shooting position. Trap was the tactic that Yang Qindong had prepared for the Mongol cavalry. Relying on the advantage of the Cold Front Division's firepower, they would surround the 80,000 soldiers until they surrendered. With that, they would be able to capture many strong laborers. This would be extremely important for Yang Qindong's plans. Chapter 1424. How would the Mongol cavalry know about this? They only knew that their enemies were a bunch of mobs. Their uniforms were not uniform. In fact, it was rare for an army to unify their uniforms. However, why were there so many different races? There were also the White Russian and Mongol soldiers. Although they were holding swords, their arms were trembling. They were clearly a bunch of untrained commoners who had never seen life and death. Could they really fight with these people? As the elite cavalry of the Golden Horde, these 5,000 Mongol cavalry had their own pride. When they found out that their opponents were so weak, they were filled with arrogance. In their eyes, they only needed one charge to break the morale of their opponents. Then all that was left was to jump on their horses and slaughter them. One by one, the Mongolian cavalrymen laughed out loud and got on their horses. They got into formation and were ready for an assault. On the other hand, the five-star army camp. Just as the Mongol soldiers thought, many of the sword-wielding soldiers were trembling. They were just commoners a few days ago. However, because the five-star army gave them good treatment, they joined with the mindset of taking advantage of the situation. Some of them were so hungry that they could not take it anymore. When they found out that becoming a member of the 5-star army meant that they could eat and fill their stomachs, why would they care about anything else? The world was big, but the stomach was the biggest. As such, the recruitment process for the 5-star army was very simple. Very quickly, 60,000 people were gathered. In the following few days of military training, the soldiers of the new Second Army finally understood what it meant to be infuriated when compared to others, what it meant to be a bunch of mobs, and what it meant to be unteachable. Not to mention other things, just the fact that these new soldiers could not even tell left from right. When they walked in formation, there were all sorts of postures. There were even a few who walked with crutches. If they could not even understand the basics of walking, how could they win the battle? Because of this, many officers had reported the situation to their superiors. In the end, when it was reported to Yang Chendong, it was like a stone sinking into the ocean. Now these so-called unqualified soldiers had walked onto the battlefield. Looking at their performance, they were already scared out of their wits. If a fight really broke out, what would be the result? Would they be defeated before they could even meet the enemy? Although they were worried, the order was given by Yang Chendong. No matter how dissatisfied the selected instructors of the new Second Army were, they could only suppress it for now. Whether it was in Xianxia or the 5-star army, Yang Chendong's position had never been shaken, and no one could question his words. The instructors who trained them did not understand. Even the acting division commander of the White Russian Army, Nikolov, and the deputy division commander, Ahuli, could not understand. In their eyes, such unqualified soldiers should not be on the battlefield. However, there were also people who understood, such as the Cold Blade warriors. As Yang Chendong's earliest trainees, many of them had learned from him. They even slept together, ate together, and trained together. They were really inseparable, and that was why the Cold Blade warriors were so strong and loyal. Even now, the selection of the Cold Blade warriors was extremely strict. Not only did they have to go through strict background checks from the previous 5 generations, but they also had to see if they could endure hardships and if they really had the strength. As for the Han Chinese standards, there was no need to mention them. This was the most basic. Of course, the treatment of the Cold Blade warriors was not something that other armies could compare to. Because of that, while Yang Chendong trusted them, the Cold Blade warriors also trusted Yang Chendong. As long as it was a decision made by the 6th young master, they would follow it wholeheartedly. Even if he asked them to climb a mountain of swords or dive into a sea of fire, they would not frown. Just like now, seeing that the Mongolian cavalry was about to attack, the other people were still nervous. Even the White Russian recruits were not confident, but these cold vanguard warriors did not even think about this problem. Their thoughts were very simple, and that was to destroy the enemy. Hurt them so that they would tremble when they heard their names and lose their will to fight. On the battlefield, the 5,000 Mongol cavalry who were ready finally moved. Facing the encirclement formed by the 5-star soldiers 5 li away, they launched an assault. A total of 5,000 cavalrymen formed a fan shape as they charged forward in a long snake formation. Their shouts and cries rang out incessantly. The Mongol cavalry loved to shout when charging. It was as if they did not shout, they would not be able to show off their strength. Often such shouts could scare the enemy and cause their morale to drop by 30%. White Russian soldiers, take out your bows and get ready. One of the new Second Army's commanders yelled. Following which, the 8,000 White Russian archers raised their weapons and began to knock their arrows. Speaking of which, these archers were not up to standard. They had only trained for less than 7 days. Although some of them had come into contact with things when they were young, there were only a few of them. Most of them could only shoot arrows. As for hitting the target, that was not a joke. Although the number of 8,000 soldiers was not small, no one knew how much of a threat and lethality they could pose. Just when everyone was looking at this scene worriedly, Nicholas and Ari, who were standing on the top floor of Kazan City, were looking at these recruits with a pair of binoculars. Suddenly, many of the recruits released their arrows without listening to orders. Moreover, the distance of the arrows was very close. Some of them simply threw the arrows 5 or 6 meters away. Beta Persei, who was looking at this scene through his binoculars, could not hold his breath and spat it out. Then he felt that this was not good, so he quickly lowered his head and suppressed his laughter. How was this the performance of an army? Nikolov and Ahuli lowered their heads, wishing that there was a hole in the ground for them to crawl into. These were their soldiers. Although they were not personally trained by them, this kind of performance still made them feel ashamed. On the city tower, many people who saw this scene could not help but laugh, including Yang Chendong. However, he was not mocking them. He just felt amused. Then, when everyone was laughing, he said, "There will be a first time for everyone, but this kind of thing will not happen again in the future." Naturally, no one doubted Yang Chendong's words, but it did not stop some people from thinking otherwise. Many people even thought that after this battle these recruits would probably die, so there was no need to talk about the future. In this way, the sixth young master was right. They did not know that the reason Yang Chendong said this was because of his confidence in the soldiers of the Cold Front Army. And after these White Russian recruits experienced such a humiliating scene, they would definitely work hard and continuously improve their abilities after experiencing a bloody and fiery battle. This way, after training hard, they wouldn't have such a useless performance. It was unknown if everyone understood Yang Chendong's thoughts, but now, everyone's eyes were on the battlefield. They watched as the Mongolian cavalry got closer and closer to the five-star army on the right. They were less than a mile away. At this distance, many of the Mongolian cavalry laughed. If the five-star army did not move, they would not have the chance to move. Many of the Cold Front army laughed. At this distance, it was too late for their opponents to escape. Next, it was time for them to perform. Commander Zhou Guangquan had been a little impatient for a long time, and his eyes became brighter. His right index finger had already touched the trigger and he fired. At the same time he touched the trigger, a bullet shot out from the muzzle, and it went straight for a young Mongolian cavalier who was dressed in armor. Following the sound of the gunshot, the young general, who had his eyes wide open with excitement on his face, felt a pain in his chest. It was as if his entire body was fixed in place. Following that, he lost consciousness. His entire body was powerless as he fell from the horse. The sound of gunfire was in order. The regiment commander took the lead and fired the first shot. The 3 battalions, a total of 1,200 soldiers, did not hold back. They raised their guns and fired in unison. Originally, they were all aiming at their targets. Now they were happily harvesting lives, displaying their powerful side. The Cold Front Army had the 95 style in their hands, so they could fire in bursts or in bursts. 1,200 people against 5,000 people. It seemed like there was a huge difference in numbers, but in reality, it was just 1 against 4. This was not a big deal. Compared to the 2,000 black cavalry taking care of the 100,000 Baiming Liaodong iron cavalry, this paled in comparison. Gunshots rang out, and according to the commander's rules, a soldier could only fire 5 shots. No matter what the result was, they could not fire anymore. The meat that they ate, they had to leave the soup for their brothers, right? With each person firing 5 shots, that was 6,000 bullets. It was inevitable that some of them would miss and some of them would be hit by 2 bullets. After the gunshots, not all of the Mongol cavalry were wiped out. At the very least, there were less than 1,000 Mongol cavalry standing there. However, they were no longer charging forward. Instead, they were either standing there in a daze or turning their horses around to escape. After 10 years of training, not everyone in the Cold Front Army was a sharpshooter, but there were many who could hit the 48th circle with 5 bullets. Since these enemies had fearlessly charged right in front of them, there was no way they would be courteous to them. With each person firing 5 bullets, the results obtained were indeed not bad. More importantly, after this round of shooting, it also shattered the confidence of the Mongolian cavaliers to charge forward, causing them to feel fear as if they had met the devil and they lost their will to fight. New Second Army, charge forward to eliminate the enemy. White Russian Division, charge forward to clean up the battlefield. Be quick. The Cold Front Army will be in charge of keeping watch. Captain Zhou Guangquan also only fired 5 bullets. Although he was holding a light machine gun, it was just a precaution. Now that he saw that the opponent was not going to be easy, he would not casually waste bullets and take the lead to break the rules. Chapter 1425. The 4,000 cavalrymen of the new Second Army, who had been waiting impatiently for a long time, dashed out like arrows, leaving the bowstring after receiving the military order. Following closely behind were 15,000 White Russian recruits. Although they didn't have much combat experience and their military qualities weren't up to par, they were still capable of cleaning up the battlefield. Even so, when many of the recruits arrived at the battlefield and saw the blood flowing like a river and broken limbs all over the ground, Many of them couldn't help but vomit. This was normal and no one would laugh at them. Elite veteran soldiers weren't originally so iron-blooded. They were all tempered through battle after battle. In the middle of the Mongolian army, Gray saw this scene with his own eyes, and a flash of astonishment appeared in his eyes. It wasn't that he hadn't seen firearms before. His old opponent, the White Russian army, had them. Their Khan also had a small number of firearms, but in terms of power, they were far inferior to the firearms in the hands of the Five-Star Army. Not only could the Five-Star Army's firearms fire faster, their accuracy was also higher than the firearms he had seen before. Most importantly, they could fire continuously. Heavens! Where did they get these firearms from? They were so powerful. The cavalryman's charge was just seeking death. How could they win? At this moment, panic appeared in his heart, and he was no longer as confident and conceited as he was before. After being frightened by the powerful firepower and might of the 95 style, Gray didn't immediately order his men to rescue the survivors. When the battlefield was almost completely cleaned up, he suddenly thought of something. However, at this moment, the 1,000 cavalrymen who had luckily escaped the clutches of the musketeers were being surrounded by the cavalrymen of the new Second Army. Friction, friction, and continuous friction. Their courage was broken. After losing their courage, the 1,000 Mongolian cavalrymen were like birds startled by the twang of a bow. They were completely surrounded, and if they were killed, if they were captured. Attack the left side, attack the left side. The firepower of the Five-Star Army on the right side had frightened him. Gray had no choice but to give up on the idea of attacking from that side. He wanted to see the situation on the left side. If he could, he would rush out from there. Now he was not thinking about how to take Kazan, but how to leave this place and inform the Khan of the fact that the Five-Star Army had powerful guns. Another 5,000 Mongolian cavaliers came from the left, and the third commander of 2nd Cold Vanguard Division, Chu Luo, laughed loudly. Good timing, good timing. It's time for our 3rd Regiment to show our might. Come on, listen to my orders and prepare to fire. Lung Feng's soldiers from the 3rd Regiment and 3 battalions were eager to give it a try. Even the new 2nd Army and White Russian cavalry beside them were no longer panicking. They focused their attention on Lung Feng, who was holding on to his musket. They wanted to see another miracle. Baba baba. Baba baba. The gunshots rang out just as everyone expected. Before the 5,000 Mongolian cavaliers could reach the Five-Star Army, most of them were killed. Then countless cavaliers rushed out to kill the survivors and clean up the battlefield. Charge and tangle with the enemy cavaliers. They won't be our match. With the lesson just now, Gray did not hesitate this time. Instead, he immediately sent out 2,000 cavaliers. He wanted to think of a way for them to tangle with the Five-Star Army. This way the enemy would not use their guns out of fear and the advantage would fall into his hands. With a single order, the 2,000 elite Mongolian cavaliers charged forward. Although they were intimidated by the powerful guns of the Five-Star Army, they had to charge forward since their general had given the order. Great, more people are coming to die. Everyone 2 bullets. Once we're done, we'll call it a day. The 3rd commander, Chu Luo, laughed loudly to release his joyful mood. Then he took the lead and fired a bullet. The bullets seemed to have eyes as they charged towards the incoming Mongolian cavalry. There were only 2,000 of them, and they were only left with less than 300 in a short period of time. By the time they arrived in front of the new 2nd Army, they were no longer able to do anything. How did this happen? How did this happen? Gray's expression became increasingly ugly when he saw the reinforcements he had sent out being buried so quickly. It was as if he had seen a ghost. While his expression changed, he turned around to look behind him. In just 2 short attacks, they had lost 12,000 cavaliers. Not a single one of the cavaliers who had charged out had returned alive. This was the first time he had seen such a loss after becoming a general. In the past, when he had fought with the White Russian Army, he had suffered some losses. However, if he wanted to retreat, he could do so. How was it like facing the Five-Star Army, where none of the cavaliers he had sent out had returned? It wasn't just Gray. The 3,000-plus cavaliers under him, as well as the 30,000 White Russian slaves, all revealed terrified expressions. This time they had thought that this was an easy mission to complete, and that it was time for them to show off the might of the Mongolian cavaliers. However, who would have thought that this was simply hell? In front of the Five-Star Army, they were just like loathsome mosquitoes that could be stepped on and slaughtered at will. No one had any ideas. They could only look at Gray, hoping that he would have a way to turn the situation around. However, Gray had long since run out of ideas. He had only taken a glance behind him, and did not give the order to break out of the encirclement. From his point of view, he still had a chance. There was no need for him to make a decision to fight to the death. He could continue waiting. Once there was no news of him from the Khan for a long time, he would definitely send reinforcements. When that happened, there would be an opportunity for him to coordinate with the Mongolian cavaliers. With hope in his heart, Gray decided to pull back his troops and focus on defense. His army could no longer take a beating. If not, their morale would be completely destroyed. While the 5-star army on the left, rear and right were waiting for their opponents to choose to attack, the Mongolian cavaliers had actually stopped in their tracks. Furthermore, they quickly took out the barricades that they had put away in the morning and assumed a stance that they were going to defend to the death. This infuriated the 3 armies surrounding them. What are they doing? They've only charged out twice and they're already afraid. What a bunch of cowards. They're cowards. How can such people claim to be the strongest Mongolian cavaliers in the world? What a joke. Angry shouts followed, and there were even people shouting in dissatisfaction. When the shouts reached the Mongolian camp, the faces of Gray and many of the young generals turned pale. They were ashamed and embarrassed. Not long ago they had accused the Hans of being two-legged sheep, saying that they only knew how to hide within the city walls and not dare to come out to fight. However, today everything had changed. They had become cowards who did not dare to come out to fight. However, they were still inferior to the Hans. At the very least, the Hans had sturdy city walls, while they only had a simple camp made up of wooden fences. Could such a camp block the enemy's charge? Order the archers to prepare for a counterattack. Also, place the 30,000 White Russian slaves at the outermost perimeter. Gray said worriedly. He wanted to use the White Russians as human shields to protect their safety. Regardless of whether the White Russians were willing or not, under the threat of the 30,000 Mongolian cavaliers, they could only do as they were told. This scene was seen by the surrounding White Russian soldiers, causing many of them to reveal expressions of anger. Although these people were not their friends, from a certain point of view they had a common ancestor. In fact, if they were a few generations older, they might even be of the same race. Seeing their fellow countrymen being humiliated and threatened, some of the hot-blooded people actually took the initiative to ask for battle. They wanted to charge up and kill the Mongolian cavaliers to save the people with the same skin as them. On the city wall, the generals were still in a state of excitement from their great victory, especially Nikolai and Ahuli. This was the first time they had seen the 5-star army show off their might with their guns. Naturally, they were excited and emotional. They were proud to have joined such a powerful force. At this moment, the voices of the soldiers asking for battle reached the ears of the 2 division commanders. After looking at each other, they reported to Yang Qindong. The final decision was still in the hands of Bugnam of Gojosian. Let's talk about it later. Yang Qindong did not agree. From his point of view, now was not the time to attack. Although the White Russian soldiers were of a different race, they had surrendered to him and joined the 5-star army. He had to consider their safety. At the very least, he could not let them die for nothing. Before they could form a fighting force, Yang Qindong would not let the White Russians take the risk. This was out of kindness, and Nikolai and Ahuli were naturally clear about it. They did not fight for it. Instead, they were touched by Yang Qindong's sympathy. Furthermore, Yang Qindong's gaze was deep and calm. With the might of his guns, the 80,000 Mongolian soldiers were just monkeys in the palm of the Buddha. He could play with them however he wanted. If not for the fact that the other party was strong and could not develop without sufficient manpower, he would have already given the order to annihilate them. Yang Qindong did not hold much hatred towards the Mongol army. Due to geographical reasons, the Mongol army did not have much conflict with the Han people. Even after they were defeated in history, they did not cause much harm. Therefore, if he could capture more of them, he was willing to do so even if it took more effort. Gray didn't know about this. What he needed to do now was wait for reinforcements to appear. This time, as he was rushing for time, he had only brought 3 days' worth of rations. From his point of view, even if they could not attack Kazan City, reinforcements would arrive. If they did not have enough rations, they could just wait patiently. In fact, he was still waiting for reinforcements to appear. At that time, he might be able to coordinate with them. After seeing the might of the 5-star army's guns, he did not dare to think about attacking the city. However, there was a high possibility of retreating. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.